What if the ocean remembers? Not only in the way that water holds the moon's pull, drawing tides with its patient rhythm, but in a deeper way, a way that runs beneath language, older than thought, older than us. Every wave is a hand passing over the surface of the planet, smoothing, erasing, recording. Every drop has circled through clouds, through rivers, through rocks, carrying stories from before mountains rose, before forests thickened, before even life began its slow stirring. If we pause in stillness and listen, could we hear it? Could the salt and silence of the seas speak memory back to us? When we imagine memory, we often think of books, of libraries, of words pressed into pages. But the earth has always had its own library, and the oceans are perhaps its most vast, most secret, most patient archive. Inside the water, atoms of oxygen and hydrogen break apart, find new bonds, shift into vapor, return to rain, and the cycle continues. These molecules are billions of years old, drifting, dissolving, reforming. They have touched the breath of vanished creatures, the roots of ancient forests, the bones of trilobites swimming along a Cambrian shore. To drink from the ocean, to breathe the air shaped by its waves, is to breathe the dust of forgotten ages. Our lungs are not empty. They are filled with time. Scientists can read some of this memory. They drill into cores taken from the seabed, long cylinders of sediment where each layer is another page, written not in ink but in grains of silt, in fragments of shells, in the chemical fingerprints left by shifting climates. Oxygen isotopes whisper how cold the ancient seas once were. Carbon traces tell of forests burned, of volcanoes trembling, of atmospheres rising and falling in forgotten epochs. To hold such a core is to hold silence, millions of years folded into earth, waiting for someone to translate its muted language. And yet not all memory is clear. So much is lost in the turning of water, in the grinding of tectonic plates that pull the ocean's record downward, subducting it into the mantle where heat swallows evidence whole. Oceans remember, but they also erase. They cradle life, and then, without warning, they wipe its traces clean. Perhaps this is not cruelty, but balance. To remember everything endlessly might be unbearable, even for a planet. Forgetting may be a kind of mercy. Still, fragments remain. Fossils, corals, microplankton frozen in time. Whole lineages are carved into the limestone cliffs that once were ocean beds. Their story is not written in words, but in patterns. The curve of a shell, the spiral of an ammonite, the delicate calcium skeleton of creatures too small for the naked eye. Together they form the memory of deep time, speaking softly of how life grew, changed, disappeared, and rose again. But what if the ocean remembers not only in atoms and sediments, not only in the science we can measure, but in some deeper way? Could it be that the endless motion of waves is itself a kind of thought, not like ours, not conscious in the sense we know, but something slower, vaster, woven into tides and thermohaline currents? We do not know. Perhaps we cannot know. And yet the question lingers like mist on a horizon. Could the ocean itself dream? You might imagine standing on a shoreline at night, listening to the rhythmic push and pull of waves. Each swell travels across miles, shaped by storms we did not watch, across distances we cannot see. Within their movement is a kind of memory, of wind, of weather, of time itself passing across the face of the earth. To hear them is to feel a thread that links us not just to this moment, but to every moment before, every memory the waters have touched. The waves do not rush. They take their time. They carry patience in their repetition. And this, perhaps, is the strangest part. We ourselves are mostly water. The ocean lives within us. We carry its chemistry in our veins, its salt in our tears, its rhythms in the beat of our hearts. Our bodies are small reflections of the Earth's great sea, miniature archives that will also pass, dissolve, vanish. Perhaps when we speak of memory, we are really listening to the ocean inside ourselves, to that ancient inheritance flowing through blood and breath. Memory is not just in books or stones or digital signals. It is in motion, in dissolution, in repetition. It is in water. If the oceans remember, they do so with a patience that dwarfs our own. Human history is a flicker against the immensity of geological time, but the seas have seen it all. They watched us gather at shores. They swallowed villages when waters rose. They kept fragments of our ships, our tools, our bones, pressing them into their silt. They hold our beginnings, and they will hold our endings. Perhaps one day our traces will sink deep, compacted into technofossils, plastics and alloys, strange markers of a species that once lived beside the shore. Will someone else, in some remote future, find them just as we once found trilobites and ammonites? Will the ocean relay our story, quietly, patiently, layer upon layer in its endless archive? What if we too are nothing more than another entry in the sea's long memory, another dream between tides? And yet, for every memory the ocean keeps, for every particle of silence it guards, there is so much it lets fall away. Whole lives undone in deep water, whole histories devoured in trenches. It reminds us that existence is fragile, that to remember is astonishing but to forget is inevitable. And so we listen carefully, not only to what the ocean reveals, but to what it hides beneath its shimmering silence. Because if this much can be remembered, and this much can be lost, what else might still be waiting, hidden, in the abyss just beyond sight? If this much can be remembered, and this much hidden, then what about the memories that were born before memory itself? Long before the seas learned to gather fossils, long before shells fell to the seabed or corals built their stony diaries, there was only darkness. No sunlight, no sky overhead, just the abyss. The quiet, unlit world where black water stretched endlessly, unbroken by warmth from above. In that silence, something extraordinary began to stir. There, along ridges torn open by tectonic breath, the earth exhaled. Great plumes of superheated water, rich with minerals, poured from the crust, carrying metals, chemicals, and energy into the waiting ocean. These deep-sea vents, rising like underwater chimneys, may have been the first alchemists, mixing iron and sulfur, carbon and nitrogen into delicate reactions. In that dark crucible between pressure and heat, life may have sparked into being. Not because there was light, but because there was shadow. Not because the ocean was rich, but because it was empty enough to sustain possibility. Scientists study these vents today, watching pale crabs and blind shrimp crawl through boiling plumes, colonies of strange worms clinging to sulfur-rich chimneys. Their survival does not rely on sunlight, but on chemistry, feeding on microbes that turn minerals into energy. Chemosynthesis, not photosynthesis. Perhaps it was here, in just such a system, that the first fragile molecules assembled into something more self-organizing, self-replicating, whispering the earliest syllables of what we now call life. Could it be that our oldest ancestor is not a creature of light, but of darkness? The abyss holds a different kind of time. Down here, far beneath waves and storms, nothing is marked by day or night. There is no cycle of sunrise or sunset, only endless dark. Time stretches differently, not by the turning of the sky but by the slow drift of elements, the fall of silt, the invisible clock of decay. Is it possible that this absence of light offered something vital, an uninterrupted stillness, a place where patience was infinite and chance could slowly weave complexity from chemistry? Black smokers, those towering pillars of minerals erupting from the crust, rise and collapse in centuries, only to rise again, endlessly rebuilt by the Earth's hidden heat. This rhythm of creation and destruction mirrors the nature of entropy itself. Nothing stays, everything shifts. Yet through this restlessness new beginnings unfold. We think of darkness as absence, but here in the abyss, darkness was fullness. A womb, a holding place, where energy could be gathered and life could be coaxed into existence. If we close our eyes and picture it, we might imagine an ocean with no star above it, no warmth except the hidden fire of the planet. We imagine molecules drifting, colliding, assembling, breaking apart, and assembling again. For millions of years, the ocean rehearsed this endless chemistry, testing combinations in silence, searching for forms that might endure. And maybe, after countless times, something fragile succeeded. A cell barely alive, but alive enough to keep replicating, to keep remembering. When we look out at the stars, we often ask if we are alone. But perhaps the deeper question is if darkness itself, this fertile abyss, exists elsewhere. Could other planets, heavy with oceans and heat beneath their crusts, be carrying out the same chemical rehearsals right now? In silence, far beyond us, in abysses we will never touch, might life be gathering itself once more, teaching molecules to cling into memory? The beauty of this question is that we will never know for certain, but we can return, again and again, to the ocean's abyss, imagining not what was already bright, but what was yet to shine. Life did not begin with light, but with shadow, with pressure, with patience. From silence into murmur, from simplicity into complexity. And yet, even as we listen to this ancient origin, we must remember that it remains hidden beneath the waves, hidden in blackness, hidden in the abyss before light. Perhaps this was not only where life began, but where life continues to begin, quietly, silently, still unfolding in places we cannot see. And if beginnings can happen in the dark, then what other stories are still stirring there, waiting to be told? And if beginnings can happen in the dark, if life can stir where no star has ever reached, then what lingers after those beginnings fade? What becomes of the lives that once swam through blackness, that once crawled upon ancient shores, that once filled the water with sound? They do not vanish entirely. Their bodies dissolve, yes, their voices are gone. And yet, in the quiet patience of the ocean, something is kept. It is pressed, it is buried, it is sealed into memory. These are the fossils in the waves, fragments of time turned into stone. The ocean is not only a place of motion and forgetting. It is also a place of capture, where the smallest particles of shell or bone drift downward and settle onto the seafloor. A trilobite's exoskeleton fractured by pressure, a coral colony bleaching white, a forest of plankton blooming, dying, and falling. All of it trickles into silence. At first it is only loose matter, scattered dust of once living structures. But under the weight of millions of years, under the steady compression of layers piling upon layers, memory becomes stone. Softness hardens. Silence crystallizes. The ocean writes. The science, though precise, feels dreamlike. Sediment builds like pages in a long book, each thinner than a whisper, but together stretching across epochs. Within these layers lie snapshots of ancient climates, preserved in the shape of shells. Oxygen isotopes etched within their calcium mark the warmth or chill of the waters they once floated in, like invisible ink recording the breath of forgotten atmospheres. Carbon traces tell of cycles of abundance and collapse, of forests swallowed into coal, of fire and volcanic ash drifting across skies. Every fossil, every grain of pressed sediment, is an index, though written in a language far subtler than ours. It is geology as literature, time as author, memory as ink. And yet, as we look at these stone-bound lives, we are drawn to a paradox. Fossils exist because of loss. They are not life itself, but the aftermath of life, sealed tightly by circumstance. Most creatures leave nothing behind. For every fossil discovered, there were countless others, soft-bodied, delicate, washed away before a trace could form. Fossils remember, but they also remind us of how much has been forgotten. Is it possible that we read only the faintest fragments of the ocean story, a shattered mosaic where most of the pieces are missing? Maybe, maybe not. Still, what remains is wondrous. Ammonites spiraled like galaxies, embedded in limestone. Fish with bones so fine they still show their fins, as though they were swimming just yesterday. Microscopic foraminifera, countless in number, leaving chalk cliffs where whole worlds have collapsed into whiteness. Time becomes visible through these remnants, reminding us that life has always been both fragile and enduring, not because it resists decay, but because decay leaves shadows long after the light is gone. If we walk along a beach, we see the story still unfolding. Shells cracked by waves, driftwood worn to bone-white softness, sand itself ground from the skeletons of ancient reefs. Each wave carries a whisper of things once alive, each tide depositing fragments of the past at our feet. We do not think of sand as fossil, but it is vast ground memory, softened into grains small enough to slip unrecognized through our hands. The ocean's erosion is writing in reverse, turning structure into dust, permanence into impermanence. Yet still, in that dust, the memory remains. To press a fossil in our palm is to touch time itself. It is to feel an echo of a creature that once moved with intention, that once fed, once multiplied, once lived within the great unfolding cycle. It no longer swims, but its outline, its chemical imprint, its stone-carved body remain as if to say, I was here. And perhaps that is memory's truest form, not to preserve the whole, but to preserve enough that we can still imagine the rest. Sometimes, when we hold fossils, when we gaze at cliffs carved of chalk or limestone, we forget that we ourselves are becoming part of this slow archive. Our bones, our tools, the traces of our civilizations will one day sift down as well. Buried in the quiet, pressed into seafloor, dissolved and replaced with minerals, we too will be remembered, though not in words, not in books, but in stone. Is this a kind of immortality, or is it erasure disguised as permanence? If memory is written into rock, then is it really memory at all, or only silence taking form? And just as every fossil whispers, entropy does too. Even fossils decay. Limestone dissolves into rain. Pressure crumbles outlines. Subduction drags them beneath tectonic plates where molten heat unravels all record into plasma. The ocean writes, the ocean keeps, and yet the ocean also forgets. We live in the small margin between. Our wonder arises not only from what is visible but from knowing how much has already been erased. Still, in this fleeting glimpse we can imagine. Tiny shells, fractured bones, spores drifting down into the abyss. Each one is both an end and a beginning. Fossils remind us that life always leaves a trace, even if the trace is only partial, even if it slips past our grasp. Maybe we do not need the whole story. Maybe the fragments are enough. And yet, if the ocean can write the past into permanence, even in stone, what of the breath it once exhaled into the air? What of the gases released by its earliest dwellers, invisible but world-changing? For long before fossils filled its layers, the ocean taught the atmosphere itself to breathe. For long before fossils filled its layers, long before stone began keeping record, the ocean taught the air itself to breathe. We breathe because the oceans learned first. It was not always so. There was a time when the skies above this planet were heavy with carbon and methane, choked with gases too bitter and too harsh for lungs. The seas were green with minerals, warm in places, lifeless still in others. Into this silence, into this unbreathable world, came something impossibly small, almost invisible, tiny filaments of life that would change everything. Cyanobacteria, fragile as threads of silk, drifting with currents, multiplying beyond measure. They did not need the light of day to tell them what to do. They took in sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, and as if by accident, they released something else, oxygen. At first, it was no more than a trace, a faint exhale lost into the vast ocean around them. But the ocean listened. It absorbed this breath, let it dissolve, let it mingle with currents that carried it from shallow shores to the deep rolling basins. Slowly, quietly, the chemistry of the entire planet began to turn. Not suddenly, but patiently, in the hush of deep time. The great oxidation event, scientists call it now. But naming it does not capture its mystery. Imagine instead an ocean whispering to the sky, vapor rising in waves, carrying oxygen upward into air that had never known its touch. Each molecule an invitation, a new presence rewriting what the atmosphere was. It took millions of years because oceans and atmospheres are slow to change. But once begun, the exhale could not be stopped. Rocks rusted as iron in the seas reacted with oxygen, staining the world in colors of red and ochre. Life itself adapted, fractured, struggled, died, and yet out of all that turmoil came something extraordinary. An atmosphere that could support lungs, creatures, voices, us. It is difficult for us to grasp the scale of that transformation. To imagine air without oxygen is to imagine a silence too thick to breathe. But once the oceans began to exhale, they reshaped not only chemistry but possibility. They taught Earth not just to balance gases but to create environments where future beings, too, might inhale. We breathe today because tides once carried oxygen through themselves until the very air was changed. Our every breath is a borrowed rhythm from ancient seas. And yet, the ocean remembers in strange ways. Just as it gave us oxygen, it has taken it away. There have been epochs when seas became stagnant, when circulation failed, when life at depth suffocated in dark water thick with absence. Black shales tell this tale, dark stone filled with the chemical signatures of oxygen loss. Entire ecosystems erased because the planet forgot how to breathe evenly. The ocean alternates between generosity and withdrawal, teaching us still that nothing is ever guaranteed. Is it possible, then, that breathing itself is a fragile gift, not a certainty? Could it be that the exhalations of cyanobacteria, seemingly endless in patience, are not eternal at all but temporary, a fleeting window in which life thrives before chemistry turns again? We do not know, but every breath we take is a reminder of how unlikely, how precious, this balance is. Not because air is infinite, but because once it wasn't, and maybe someday it won't be again. When we lie awake and breathe, slowly, deeply, we rarely consider that we are practicing something first learned by oceans. Our lungs mirror waves. They rise, they fall, they release, they return. Inhale, exhale, a tide within us. Perhaps that is the ocean's oldest lesson, that breathing is not about permanence, but about return. The cycle itself is what endures. The ocean inhales carbon and exhales oxygen, again and again, shaping not just the air but the rhythm of life itself. Even now, most of the world's oxygen comes from its waters, from microscopic plankton drifting invisibly across currents, exhaling into the sky. They are our quiet partners, unseen but essential. When whales feed on them, when currents mix them, when dust from deserts drifts across oceans to fertilize them, they respond with breath. What we breathe is, in truth, their song. A song we cannot hear but only carry inside ourselves as life. And so, when we look at the sky and think of air as separate, we forget that it is inseparable from the sea. Every cloud, every breeze, every lungful of oxygen traces back to life in the water. The ocean's earliest whispers became the atmosphere's everlasting voice. Light upon the waves is not only reflection. It is continuation, a reminder that we are breathing with the sea, not apart from it. And yet, if oceans can exhale life into air, if they can reshape skies into breath, what else might their hidden currents carry? What unseen forces stir beneath the surface, passing not only gases but warmth, energy, memory across the globe? Perhaps breath is not the only gift the seas have offered. Perhaps they also carry time itself, circulating it in currents that pulse like a planetary heartbeat. Perhaps breath is not the only gift the seas have offered. Perhaps they also carry time itself, circulating it in currents that move with a patience beyond anything we can feel. Beneath the surface, far below the restless shimmer of waves, the oceans are always moving, always flowing, always quietly turning. Warm water drifts northward, cold water sinks to the abyss, nutrients rise and fall through invisible gradients. Together, these pathways create a concealed conveyor belt, stirring heat, salt, and memory across the globe. To watch it would take longer than a lifetime, for its cycle is measured not in days or seasons, but across centuries, across ages. What if these currents are the planet's pulse? A rhythm so vast and slow that we do not sense it, yet one that keeps climates alive. The thermohaline circulation, scientists call it the Great Overturning, driven by differences in temperature and salinity. But names do not capture its mystery. Imagine instead a pulse that spreads warmth from the tropics into frozen seas, carrying life across improbable distances, balancing what would otherwise collapse into extremes. Without it, whole coasts would freeze, deserts might widen, winds might shift, rains might vanish. The ocean's breath might have given U.S. air, but its veins carry stability. Its hidden tides are the heartbeat of worlds, and time is written into these flows. Tiny isotopes of carbon, of oxygen, attach themselves to drifting water masses, marking where currents have traveled and how long they have wandered in the dark. Scientists study them as if they were faint tracks left by ghosts, tracing centuries of movement invisible to the eye. In this way, The ocean tells us where it has been, not in voices or fossils but in chemical signatures, like whispers pressed into each droplet. Even silence leaves a trail. Currents also carry memory in another sense, in the constant recycling of nutrients. Dust falls from deserts, rich with iron, landing on the sea's surface. Phytoplankton bloom, capturing sunlight, multiplying, exhaling oxygen. Some of them sink, others feed fish, which feed whales, which, when they eventually fall, become feasts for the deep. Nothing is forgotten entirely. Everything is carried forward, dissolved, transformed, recirculated. Not because the ocean clings to memory, but because it cannot help repeating it, endlessly, tirelessly, in cycles as old as the earth. But these cycles are not always steady. History shows us times when the pulse faltered. During certain ice ages, circulation slowed or even stopped. Glaciers expanded, climates wavered. Whole species vanished into silence as food chains unraveled. Entropy works here as well. Systems drift, weaken, collapse. Currents forget their patterns, and the world above feels the consequences. Is it possible that time itself, as we live and breathe it, is tied to the steadiness of these deep flows? Maybe if the ocean's pulse changes, our measure of days and seasons changes too. Our sense of normality revealed as temporary, fragile, borrowed. We often imagine time as a straight line, but the ocean shows us it is more like a tide, more like a current, moving forward, yes, but also looping back, repeating, dissolving, surging, retreating, carrying remnants of the past within every new beginning. It does not distinguish sharply between what has been and what will be. All of it moves together, vast and interwoven, in motions too wide to see entirely. To drift in the ocean is to drift in time itself. Perhaps, then, when we stand at a shoreline, gazing out at waters that rise and fall, we are not only watching waves but listening to the echo of deep currents beneath them. Perhaps our own hearts beat in quiet sympathy with movements we cannot perceive. And perhaps these slow circulations are not only sustaining us, but shaping how history unfolds, how civilizations rise in climates gentle enough for crops, how they fall when rains shift and rivers dry. The ocean's currents may be vast, but they are not eternal. Already, scientists wonder whether melting ice, freshened waters, and warming seas could unbalance this flow. What happens if the pulse grows weaker? What happens if it changes direction or slows into silence? Could the climates we know slip into something unrecognizable, not from sudden force but from gradual forgetting? And yet, the ocean teaches us that change itself is memory. Circulations alter, climates shift, and still new balances emerge. We may fret about collapse, but collapse itself becomes another rhythm, another story inscribed into water. Maybe what seems like an ending is only another turning of the tide. If the ocean breathes life into the skies, if it pulses time through its hidden veins, then what does it mean when those same waters also erase? For even as currents remember, they bury whole worlds into the seafloor, pressing them into silence. And so we are drawn toward another of the ocean's truths, the silent extinctions it has both witnessed and caused. For even as currents carry memory through the veins of the planet, they are not only givers, they are also takers. The ocean's hidden rhythms, its shifts in warmth and chemistry, have not always been gentle. Across deep time, the seas that sustained life have also smothered it. Entire worlds of creatures have vanished in moments too vast for us to imagine, yet too swift in geological terms to endure. Oceans have birthed countless lives, but they have taken almost as many. Each extinction, though wrapped in silence, still leaves a whisper, a trace, an echo caught in stone. The record is not found in loud proclamations, but in subtle changes written into sediments. Geologists read them as one might read the faint creases of an ancient manuscript. A layer suddenly dark with carbon, marking fires that raged when climates shifted. Bands of limestone abruptly ending, where reefs once flourished before acid seas dissolved them away. Traces of isotopes, carbon, oxygen, sulfur, that shift abruptly, pointing to sudden die-offs, collapses, as if the ocean had simply exhaled differently, withdrawing a chemical balance it once freely gave. These are the quiet voices of vanished lives, archived in elemental script. Consider the end Permian extinction, when more than 9 of every 10 marine species disappeared. The seas turned sour, oxygen fled, and methane laced the waters. What caused it is still debated: volcanoes, climate spirals, disrupted currents. But to the ocean, cause mattered less than effect. Life choked, reefs dissolved, entire lineages ended. If one could stand upon a Permian shore and watch centuries pass in moments, the sight would not have been sudden apocalypse, but a gradual emptying. Reefs thinning, fish absent, shells fewer, waters dimmer. Perhaps the silence would have been more haunting than any eruption, an erasure too steady to hear until it was complete. And yet, extinction is not always a singular catastrophe. Sometimes it is a rhythm, a recurrence. Ocean anoxia, waters stripped of oxygen, has happened again and again, blanketing the deep in death, reducing seas to stagnant layers where only microbes endure. Each time, the buried record shows a blackout, black shale rich with organic matter, compressed from worlds once thriving. These rocks are not merely geological layers. They are graves that stretch across continents, silent cemeteries holding the traces of lives erased together. It is tempting to think extinction is an ending, but the ocean does not frame it so. To the sea, extinction is transformation, the removal of one pattern so another may emerge. Entropy ensures nothing stays the same. What is lost in one epoch becomes the foundation for another. Whole reefs bury into limestone, later to be lifted as mountains. Shells crushed into dust reemerge as sand. Even absence becomes sediment, as silence is pressed into future stone. Not because the ocean chooses to forget, but because forgetting is woven into its design. We try to imagine the sound of these losses, but perhaps the truer sound was no sound at all. Species do not know they are the last of their kind. A shell drifts down as countless shells before it did. A reef fragments, piece by piece, unmarked by ceremony. The extinction is only visible in hindsight, when we press open a timeline and see absence extending where once there was abundance. The ocean teaches us that fragility is not exception but rule. Survival is the brief moment, disappearance the longer story. And yet, we stand in awe of what endured. Life rebounded after each collapse, in new forms, carrying fragments of the past but reshaping them into futures unimagined. After reefs dissolved, new builders arose. After trilobites disappeared, vertebrates expanded. This rhythm of erasure and emergence is not cruel, even if it seems merciless. Perhaps it is the ocean's quiet truth that permanence was never the point. What survives is change itself. What remains is the capacity to begin again. Still, the silences speak. Tiny chemical markers in ancient limestones still murmur of oxygen that vanished. Black shales still hum with the absence of abundance. The ocean holds these silences close, not as warnings but as reminders. We look upon them and ask, could it happen again? Is it happening now, in places already turning stagnant, in reefs dissolving from acid, in the warmth pushing circulation from its path? Maybe, maybe not, but the possibility lingers, like the hush between waves. To drift through the story of extinctions is to glimpse the fragility of identity itself. We often think we are immune, set apart by knowledge or memory. But knowledge cannot resist chemistry, and memory cannot outweigh entropy. The ocean could take us too, not because it is cruel, but because it simply continues, carrying climates into balances indifferent to us. Extinction whispers more than loss. It whispers humility, reminding us that even the most elaborate forms are entries in a record that can, and will, be erased. And yet, if so much can vanish, if whole worlds can dissolve into stone and silence, what of the traces that rivers carry to the sea each day? What of the memory of mountains ground to dust, flowing into waters that bury them layer by layer? If species can fade, could landscapes too leave only faint shadows written in currents? Perhaps the ocean's next story is not only of what it erases, but of what it gathers anew, in the drift and memory of erosion. Perhaps the ocean's next story is not only of what it erases, but of what it gathers. For while life itself may vanish into silence, the land is always speaking, always breaking, always leaning toward the sea. Rivers carve their way across valleys, across plains, carrying silt and stone and fragments of once immovable mountains. Every grain that slides into water is a record, a small testimony of something once tall, now worn, once solid, now reduced to dust. Erosion is not absence, it is translation. The earth rephrasing its landscapes into languages the ocean can understand. Each river is a storyteller, but not a fast one. It cuts and lifts and carries at a pace so slow that only deep time can measure it. A pebble tumbling from a cliff does not announce anything grand, but multiplied over millennia, the story grows vast. Entire ranges slouch downward. Cliffs collapse into beaches. Even the hardest rock yields to the patience of water. It may take millions of years to reshape a continent, but the rivers never forget, and the ocean never refuses. Grain by grain, particle by particle, the memory of the heights becomes the silence of the deep. When you look at a river flowing, you do not see mountains in motion. And yet, that is what you are truly watching. Each shimmer carries with it minerals and sand, tiny signatures of stone weathered by wind, frost, and rain. Some of these particles will travel only a moment, settling nearby. Others will ride the current all the way to the ocean, scattering across deltas, sinking slowly into still waters below. Over time, layers build. Silts, clays, and sands accumulate, flattening into strata that press against each other like pages. We cannot read them at once, but if drilled into, if unfolded carefully, they unravel as testimonies. Records of vanished hills, of climates once lush, of landscapes that eroded long before us. And there is a beauty in this decay. Every loss on land becomes a gain in the sea. When a mountain crumbles, its fragments do not vanish. They are carried, stored, remembered in quiet layers. Limestone forms from shells pressed into stone, but shale forms from silt, from mud, from rivers that have cradled mountains into dust. The seabed is an archive of forgetting, where every collapse becomes another layer of story. If the ocean forgets through extinction, it remembers through erosion. Is it possible, then, that the earth itself is a being in conversation with itself? The land erodes, tells its tale into rivers. The rivers dissolve, carry, pour into oceans. The oceans bury, fold, preserve in their deep silence. Later still, tectonic plates lift these sediments, mountain ranges are born again, and the cycle repeats. Perhaps memory is not linear, but circular. Not permanent, but patient. Not complete, but continuous. When we stand on a mountain and feel its immensity, we may not imagine it ending. But erosion remembers what we do not. Even the highest peaks are only temporary sculptures, already softening, already leaning toward collapse. In the ripples of riverbeds, in the brown floodwaters after a storm, in the delta that grows fingertip by fingertip into the sea, the inevitability is written. And this is not loss alone. For without erosion, there would be no fertile floodplains, no deltas rich with life, no new shores built from the crumbled bones of lands long gone. Every layer of clay on the seafloor is a meditation on impermanence. Dust from deserts crossing oceans, volcanic ash sifting downward, silts from forgotten rivers lost to tectonics. All of it mingles, settles, and hardens far from where it began. To touch such stone millions of years later is to hold a fragment of a vanished place, carried across the world, buried in stillness. The ocean gathers not just fossils of creatures, but fossils of landscapes themselves. And yet, what can be gathered can also be buried too deeply to recover. Subduction pulls seafloors downward, into trenches, where heat and magma devour their pages, erasing those layers completely. Even erosion's memory is temporary. The tides keep writing, and the earth keeps redrawing. Maybe there is no final archive, only endless drafts dissolving and building again. If even mountains fall, if even continents are translated into dust, then what else might the ocean reflect back to us? If land can vanish into the sea, perhaps the sea can mirror land, shaping identity not just in stone, but in the way it reflects sky, light, and cycle. Perhaps the ocean is not only a keeper of geology, but a mirror of time itself. Perhaps the ocean is not only a keeper of geology, but a mirror of time itself. We lean toward water and see our faces ripple back, wavering and uncertain, yet recognizable. But what if these reflections are more than surfaces? What if, hidden within tides and currents, the ocean reflects not only us but entire ages? Patterns repeating across scales too large for one lifetime to witness. Echoes of climates once lived, echoes of cycles preparing to return. To gaze into water is to watch distortion. Our outlines shiver, stretch, dissolve into wave and light. They remind us gently that identity is never fixed. Just as our reflection is both present and unstable, so too are epochs and worlds. The ocean has reflected countless atmospheres. The heavy, choking blankets of early Earth, the oxygen-rich skies after cyanobacteria exhaled, the frozen breath of ice ages, the humid haze of warmer periods. If we lean into it deeply enough, perhaps we do not simply see our faces, but the faces of time itself, gazing back in liquid memory. Geology reveals these reflections hidden in water's chemistry. Oxygen isotopes etched in sediments mirror shifts of warmth and cold. Ratio changes between carbon forms mirror ancient balances of breath and decay, of forests spreading and burning. Just as a pool reflects an image, the ocean reflects climate, holding it inside molecules that bear the mark of their age. To scientists, these isotopes are mirrors of deep time, faint but reliable. To us, they are proof that even water remembers seasons far beyond our reach. But cycles repeat not only in chemistry. Currents return, circulation resets, tides rise and fall as the moon and earth circle each other endlessly. It is as if the ocean rehearses eternity each day, offering us small hints of patterns too vast to see. What if the rise and fall of tides are but ripples within larger, slower tides of climate? And what if each warming era, each ice age, each green and blue story reflected in fossils, is the ocean pulsing again, reminding us that the future is always, in some way, the past returning? We often think of mirrors as still, but the ocean is a restless mirror, alive with distortion, bending images into unfamiliar forms. The surface rearranges the sky, fragments the moon into shimmering shards. The reflection is true, but never identical. Perhaps that is what deep time is like, repetition that is both reminder and change. Ice ages come and go, seas retreat and return, species vanish and then reappear in new forms. Not because time repeats perfectly, but because the mirroring itself ensures difference, assures that memory always carries transformation. At night, the ocean reflects the stars. On a clear surface, constellations tremble, scattered into waves yet still recognizable. Could it be that the universe, too, is reflected here? That the ocean, in some way, gathers fragments of everything above and beyond us, holding not just the Earth's memory but the skies as well? Water folding starlight into itself, like a cosmic mirror cradled within a terrestrial one. Maybe this is the closest we come to touching galaxies without leaving the ground, by looking down instead of up. Philosophy lingers here, gently. If the ocean reflects us, then perhaps we are also mirrors. Our memories ripple, distort, repeat. Each generation inherits fragments of the last. Not identical stories, but distorted reflections that remain recognizable all the same. Cultures rise and fall, myths reappear in different guises, and in each telling we find ourselves staring back, slightly shifted, but strangely familiar. The ocean may teach us more than climate cycles. It may teach us about the looping of our own memory, our own identity. And yet, reflections are fragile. A single stone cast breaks the picture into fragments. Waves erase the image as soon as it appears. Perhaps that is the point. The ocean shows us not only memory but the impermanence of memory. We see and then we lose. We glimpse a pattern and then it is gone. Is it possible that history itself is like this, visible for a moment, then scattered into waves too turbulent to piece together? Still, we lean closer. Still, we search. Not because the reflection is whole, but because it reveals enough. Enough to suggest cycles of ice, warmth, silence, abundance. enough to suggest that the climates we now inhabit have been mirrored before. We are not the beginning, and we are not the end, but part of an endless procession reflected again and again. Even entropy appears here in liquid form. Over time, the surface smooths, the stones sink, the ripples fade. What remains is calmness, an undisturbed mirror in which the sky gazes back at itself. Maybe this is what oceans have always done. Reflect the larger forces around them, preserve them in distorted but honest repetition, carry them forward until they merge into the next reflection. And if oceans can be mirrors of time, of climate, of sky, then what of their substance itself? If salt, extracted from mountains and rivers, dissolved into seas, is a signature of all erosion, all decay, all patience, then perhaps salt is the deepest reflection of all, the mineral memory that gives water permanence. If mirrors show us fleeting outlines, then salt keeps those outlines embodied, carried forward forever in chemistry. And so, as we lean once more into the delicate shimmer of water, seeing ourselves dissolve into ripples, we might ask, are we gazing at a surface, or into a cycle that precedes and outlasts us? Are we seeing ourselves, or are we seeing echoes of the planet reflected back through ages? And if such reflections show us cycles, then what of the substance within them? What of the salt that never leaves, the oldest memory dissolved forever into the sea? If mirrors show us fleeting outlines, then perhaps salt is the deeper reflection, the substance that never disappears, the mineral memory that the sea has never let go. Salt, simple and crystalline, ancient as the first rains that fell upon stone, is dissolved into almost every drop of the ocean. It began in rock, in mountains and ridges, in cliffs eroded by wind and carried down by rivers. Rain stripped it free, grain by grain, ion by ion, and rivers delivered it carefully to the sea. Once there, it stayed, locked into waters so patient that they became a storage of millennia, a chemical ledger as old as the earth itself. This dissolving of stone into brine is not only a story of chemistry, but a story of time. Each particle of sodium and chloride is a fragment of once solid land, crumbled, carried, held forever in water. Unlike oxygen exhaled to the skies, unlike fossils buried in sediment, salt does not vanish into the deep, unknowable silence. Collects, it endures. The ocean takes in salt and does not release it in any great measure. It is, perhaps, the truest memory, the one thing that, across millions of years, does not truly leave. We know this, not from philosophy, but from science's quiet instruments. The ocean's salinity is steady because rivers deliver their freight of dissolved rock faster than tectonic cycles can bury it. Some of it precipitates out, bound into crystals in arid basins, but most remains suspended, carried endlessly in liquid patience. To taste seawater is to taste erosion. It is to taste the memory of lands long since gone, the minerals of mountains dissolved and mingling with life. Each grain of salt is both an end and a beginning. The end of a stone's solidity, the beginning of an ocean's record. And salt does more than simply accumulate, it sustains. Life depends upon it. The first cells, fragile and tentative, floated in brine, their membranes balancing against the saltiness that cradled them. Our blood today carries a match to that chemistry, an echo of ancient seas flowing within us still. Salts preserve cells, organize their functions, allow creatures to live and breathe. Without them, life would unravel. Not because salt is alive, but because salt holds the structure that makes life possible. It is the ocean's simplest gift, yet its most essential. But what if salt is not just chemistry? What if it is memory pressed into crystal, resting in water, hidden but eternal? Could it be that within every dissolved ion is a silent ledger, holding not only what mountains once crumbled, but how time itself has worn the planet down? Salt speaks of patience, rainfall steady across epochs, rivers unhurried, yet relentless, entropy not as destruction, but as translation, the hard turning soft, the permanent dissolving into what flows. When we look at a white salt flat, stretching wide under the sun, we might imagine a vanished ocean, evaporated but leaving its memory behind. What remains is geometry made visible, the ocean crystallized into patterns almost too fragile to last. Each grain carries with it the ghost of a sea. It is as if water itself, when it disappears into air, leaves one small reminder. I was here. Perhaps that is why salt has always meant preservation for us as well. Across cultures and centuries, we have used it to hold on to food, to stall decay, to preserve what would otherwise be lost. In this way, we imitate the ocean. We take salt from its water and ask it to keep for us what time would dissolve. In doing so, we borrow a fragment of the planet's patience, pulling its chemistry into our own rituals of memory. And yet, even salt is not safe from loss. Subduction tugs entire oceans downward, burying salts along with sediments into the mantle. Their heat transforms and rearranges them, folding the ledger blank once more. Like all records, even this one is temporary. But in its endurance, salt still stands apart. It is the trace that lasts longest, dissolving slowly into the silence of time itself. If salt is the ocean's memory, then tasting seawater is touching deep time directly. A fragment of mountain, washed from its ancient cliff, held at last in your mouth. Not an echo, not an outline, but the substance itself, carried through ages intact. You cannot hold oxygen in your palm, you cannot hold tides, yet you can hold salt. It is life's most tangible memory, life's most material echo. And so when we speak of the sea's oldest story, perhaps it is not the fossils or the waves or the currents. It is this mineral presence, dissolved quietly, circling endlessly. Maybe memory is not always abstract. Maybe sometimes it is crystal, unyielding and clear. And yet, if salt remembers what was lost, if it carries mountains into water and keeps them dissolved, then what of the life that depends on it? What of the tiny engines of being that bloom, die, and rise again in the cycles of the sea? For memory is not only mineral but alive, written into the endless recycling of nutrients, into the invisible choreography of survival. The ocean is not static, not silent, but a circulation of matter, a looping passage of dust and salt, of cells and shells, transformed again and again into different hosts. It begins, as so often, with plankton. They drift unseen, countless as stars, fragile as breath. They bloom in sudden swells, each bloom a brief abundance radiating outward into all that feeds upon them. They take sunlight, dissolved minerals, currents, and from them they build life, delicate, ephemeral, almost weightless, yet carrying entire ecosystems on their backs. For a moment they are alive. Then, as swiftly, they die. Their bodies fall like snow, tiny flakes cascading through the darkness of the water. Oceanographers call it the marine snow, this steady drift of carbon and calcium, a fall of memory that never stops. Some of this descent will be consumed on the way down, feeding small fish and strange creatures of the midwater, lanternfish glowing faintly in perpetual dusk, jelly forms pulsing quietly through their endless descent. What remains reaches the seafloor, blanketing sediment, locking the remains of small lives into the geological archive. There, compressed across epochs, they form new layers of stone, just as fossils and erosions dust do. But before they harden, before they vanish into silence, their energy moves upward again, carried through food webs, transformed into whales, into seabirds, into us. A single nutrient particle may wear 1,000 different faces. A phosphate atom, sourced from desert dust, may nourish phytoplankton, then pass into a fish, then into a whale, then return again to the deep when that body falls. The cycle is endless. Nothing is truly lost, not because the ocean resists decay, but because decay itself is the substance of renewal. Life rises because it falls. The chain is a loop, not a line. And through it all, the great mammals of the sea play their own role. When whales die, they sink into the abyss, carrying with them extraordinary weight. Their bodies become ecosystems unto themselves. Whale falls, oceanographers call them, vast oases for the dark depths. First scavengers arrive, sharks and hagfish stripping flesh. Then come worms and microbes, breaking bone, dissolving oils deep into sediment. A single whale can shape an ecosystem for 100 years. Even in their death, whales feed the world that bore them. Their absence becomes abundance. Their fall extends the chain of memory deeper still. Perhaps that is the quiet poetry of nutrients. Nothing ends, it only shifts. Atoms cycle endlessly, writing and rewriting themselves across bodies that rise and dissolve. Our own breath carries elements once breathed by ancient forests, our bones built from minerals washed long ago into seas. We are not separate from this chain, we are part of its repetition. Each meal, each exhale, each cell of ours is threaded to oceans, not symbolically but materially, scientifically, unavoidably. What if identity itself is only repetition in another form? What if we, like plankton, like whales, bloom for a time, then dissolve, returning ourselves to cycles greater than any one of us? The nutrient chains remind us that individuality is temporary, that matter is borrowed, never owned. Maybe the truest self is not the creature, but the circulation of atoms that continue long after the creature is gone. Perhaps memory itself is written not in books or stones, but in these movements of minerals, in calcium shells, in iron drifting across oceans, in carbon rising and sinking in unending patterns. The ocean teaches us that fertility emerges from loss. Plankton blooms die in order for whales to feed. Whales fall in order for abyssal creatures to thrive. Tiny organisms sink in order for sediments to form. There is no permanence, only continuity. Not because life resists death, but because death dissolves back into life. And yet, cycles can fail. History tells of oceans gone stagnant, where nutrients did not circulate, where surface layers became deserts. Periods of anoxia destroyed the delicate balance, silencing chains that had endured for millions of years. Those forgotten seas remind us that even repetition is not guaranteed. Entropy, ever patient, is always watching, reminding us that order is temporary, circulation fragile. Is it possible our own time might see cycles falter again? Could carbon, too abundant, disrupt the balance, warming currents until nutrients no longer rise? Maybe, maybe not. But the question lingers with us, quiet yet persistent, like pressure deep beneath waves. And still, the cycles continue. Phytoplankton bloom at dawn, their fragile bodies glowing under microscopes. Krill swarm in enormous clouds, feeding whales that stretch through oceans in silence. Whales fall, and unseen scavengers drift toward them. Sediments collect, burying remnants that may one day form cliffs. The lifelines of nutrients are old, and for now they remain steady. What we witness is an inheritance so vast that it humbles us. Our existence is entangled with marine snow, with iron dust, with whale bones falling silently into the dark. If salt is the ledger of ancient erosion, then nutrients are the handwriting of living seas. They trace each turn, each repetition, each cycle of life across waters indifferent to beginnings and endings. They remind us that to survive is not to endure unchanged, but to dissolve, to transform, to enter once more the pattern that sustains the whole. And yet, if nutrients can write survival into new forms, if death can feed life and cycles endlessly repeat, what of the moments when the ocean itself is placed under command, when its movements answer not to plankton or whales, but to ice? For there have been ages when glaciers reached out with frozen hands, pressing not only upon land, but upon the seas themselves. When ice takes charge, everything slows, everything shifts. The ocean shrinks, expands, redraws its boundaries, and the world it mirrors is suddenly harder, colder, quieter. During the vast ice ages, water was locked away in towering sheets, stretching across continents, pressing valleys into silence. Sea levels plunged, shorelines retreated, shallow seas dried, and ancient coasts now buried beneath waves were once exposed to the open sky. The ocean did not vanish, but it bowed to ice, reshaping its depths, reshaping its memory. Sediment cores taken from beneath the Atlantic floor whisper of waters cooler, currents slower, circulation faltering under glacial weight. The planet's heartbeat adjusted its rhythm, taught anew by frost. Beneath frozen surfaces, the deep still carried on, but differently. Currents obeyed a changed geometry. Nutrients rose in patterns unfamiliar to us now. In some regions, life bloomed intensely, flourishing at icy margins where cold water met the sea. In other places, silence spread, dark basins starved of oxygen, circulation disrupted until memory was lost into stillness. The commands of ice were not gentle suggestions. They were law, written into the chemistry of oceans, layered into isotopes of oxygen stored in the shells of drifting plankton. From them we can still hear the echo. The sea remembers each pulse of freeze and thaw. Ice sculpts not only the land, but time itself. A single glacial advance may last tens of thousands of years, a slow heaving motion of endless white. Then just as gradually, the retreat begins, meltwater rushing back into oceans, sea levels rising, coasts swallowed, circulation reawakened. And so it has repeated, again and again, a rhythm that humbles human memory. We recall only the latest thaw, but the ocean carries countless impressions of earlier freezes, etched into sediments that span millions of years. What rises today will one day fall again, and what falls will one day rise. Perhaps the most curious thing about ice is not how it commands, but what it reveals. As seas retreat in cold ages, hidden landscapes are unveiled, plains and coasts that had lain beneath waves for thousands of years. Humans once walked there, following animals across vast tracts of exposed shelf. Then, as warmth returned, those lands drowned again, memories erased beneath swelling tides. Could it be that whole worlds of culture and story are still buried there, lost not just to time, but to the sea's obedience to ice? Maybe, maybe not. But the question lingers, pressing upon us just as glaciers once pressed upon oceans. And always, when ice relents, the seas return. Coasts redraw, currents revive, nutrients circulate anew. The ocean is never fixed, never permanent. Its history is expansion and retreat, forgetting and remembering, silence and renewal. In this it reminds us that nothing static lasts, that permanence is an illusion comfort gives but ice dissolves. The world is always rewriting itself, one freeze at a time, one thaw at a time. And yet, if ice can press its will upon oceans, reshaping shorelines and silencing currents, what else might be written into the seas themselves, not in drifting snow or isotopic whispers alone, but in living stone, beneath warm waters, in places where light can still penetrate deep enough for algae and life to collaborate, corals build their slow monuments. Not tall like mountains, nor vast like continents, but intricate, delicate, collective. Their skeletons are not merely shelter, they are archives. Every layer, every ridge, every branching finger reaching upward through water is a diary entry written in calcium carbonate, a record of seas that have come before. Reefs do not grow quickly. They accrete patiently, year after year, century upon century, their skeletons absorbing whispers of chemistry from the seawater around them. Tiny polyps, fragile as the softest skin, extract dissolved minerals and turn them into limestone frameworks. As they live, they record. Within the layers of coral is the chemistry of forgotten climates. Ratios of oxygen isotopes trace the warmth or coolness of waters long past. Strontium marks changes in salinity and currents. Each skeletal layer is a page waiting to be read, though few of us will ever touch its language directly. Scientists drill slender cores through reefs, careful not to harm the living surface, and what comes up is not only stone, it is time. Bands of light and dark, wide and narrow, hold the patterns of seasons. Abundant growth in warm abundance, slow restraint in times of scarcity. In this crystalline diary, one can read monsoon cycles, droughts, El Niño years, even the signature of distant volcanic eruptions woven into chemistry. Reefs remember not just their own waters, but skies and climates far away. They are the libraries of the tropics, holding the memory of oceans with patience. And yet these skeletons are not cold records alone. They are living cathedrals, vibrant with fish, with algae, with sound. A reef hums quietly, though we do not hear it in ordinary time. The clicks of shrimp, the murmurs of fish, the faint vibrations of life swarming over bones of stone. We stand in awe of their beauty, but their beauty is not separate from their memory. It is the very function of their being, to create space, to hold others, to turn thin layers of mineral into sustenance for thousands of species. But fragility underlies all of it. Coral builds in patience, but death can come suddenly. Waters too warm stress them, bleaching away their symbiotic algae. Oceans too acidic dissolve their skeletons faster than they are built. The reef's diary is always being written, but some pages crumble before they are complete. Bleached coral is not absence, but it is silence. The words stripped away, the language breaking down. If extinction is the erasure of entire lineages, then bleaching is the erasure of sentences mid-written. What story was the reef recording, only to have its pages dissolved? Still, even as fragility presses upon them, corals remind us of longevity. Some reefs are older than entire civilizations. They have felt ice ages rise and retreat, sea levels climb and fall, storms come and pass. They embody resilience, not because they are unbreakable, but because they persist in layered patience, in the cycle of growth and death, leaving behind stone even when forms collapse. Could it be that a reef is less an organism and more an idea, carried forward no matter how many skeletons dissolve? Maybe, maybe not. But when we look closely, we sense that the reef itself is both life and fossil, present and archive at once. There is also something quietly existential in their form. Each individual coral polyp is small, insignificant, fragile. But together, over centuries, their merged skeletons become continents of stone, visible from space. Identity shifts. The polyps die, but the reef continues. Perhaps reefs remember more than climate. They remember how the many become one, how selves dissolve into collective identity, how individual loss writes itself as structure for the future. Could this too be a lesson from the ocean? That we, individually fragile, become enduring only when our lives are layered, joined, preserved together? We walk along coasts and see broken fragments of coral scattered on beaches. To most they are only rocks, rough shapes left behind by waves. But in truth, they are shards of a diary, fragments of time chipped from a greater archive. Each piece carries within it the chemical story of a season, a memory of waters once warm, or rains once sparse, or dust blown into seas from deserts unseen. To hold a coral fragment is to touch a timeline we cannot see whole, a glimpse of the vast, slow language beneath the shimmering water. And yet, reefs do not speak loudly. They whisper in chemistry, in ratios, in dissolving edges. They remind us that memory can be soft, that testimony need not shout to endure. They persist by layering, by building, by repeating, even as entropy presses upon them. One skeleton breaks, another grows on top. One page dissolves, the volume continues. And so, in coral we find both reefs and records, both beauty and archive. A living structure, but also a stone-written book. It is the paradox the ocean often shows us, that fragility and permanence live not in opposition, but together. Life dissolves into record builds new life, endlessly. If coral skeletons preserve the patient, delicate archive of climates, then beneath them, deeper still, there is another record, one written not by life but by fire. For the ocean does not only cool, it also burns. Along rifts and ridges that thread across the planet's floor like scars, Earth opens herself, releasing molten stone into salt water. Here, magma spills upward into the dark, birthing new seafloor in slow, ceaseless eruptions. It is a strange paradox, a quiet violence hidden beneath miles of water, yet it nourishes, creates, and sustains. Out of destruction, the ocean nurtures wonder, repeating once more the oldest story. Beginnings born where endings seem certain. At the mid-ocean ridges, plates drift apart, pulled gently but irresistibly by tectonic motion. Gap after gap is filled by lava surging from below, cooling instantly in the cold sea above. Black basalt spreads outward, forming new floor, endlessly young compared to ancient continents. It is as though the planet continually erases and rewrites its undersea canvas, rebuilding what erosion dissolves on land. Some flows harden into jagged glass, others into soft pillows, curved forms revealing the speed of cooling, the moment molten turned to solid. Each ridge is both scar and cradle, marking the line where Earth's interior and ocean embrace. The chemistry here is otherworldly. Superheated water, driven by magma, jets through black smokers, towering vents that exhale plumes of minerals. Iron, sulfur, manganese. Elements dissolve and rise, billowing clouds against the abyssal dark. You might expect lifelessness here, where heat nears boiling and water is poisoned with metals. But instead, we find improbable gardens. Worms with no mouths, colonies of clams, shrimp that navigate without eyes. All thriving in a world without sunlight, a biosphere fed not by photosynthesis, but by chemosynthesis. Life here is built on chemical energy, microbes converting sulfur into nourishment, creating the foundation for entire ecosystems. Could it be that this is where life began billions of years ago, where heat met water, where minerals and molecules found themselves compressed into reaction, forming the fragile scaffolding of the first cell? The thought lingers in scientific speculation. It is not proven, but it carries possibility. Perhaps our deepest ancestry rises not from sunlight and green leaves, but from darkness, pressure, and fire beneath the ocean. Perhaps the first memories of life were chemical, written in sulfur plumes, whispered in the shimmering haze of mineral-laden waters. What is striking about these places is their rhythm. Vents flourish, collapse, rebuild. Chimneys rise from minerals precipitating, then topple and regrow. Currents shift, plumes relocate. Life adapts each time, moving from one vent to another. This cycle repeats, endlessly with no fixed permanence, only constant renewal born from decay. Not because the ocean avoids entropy, but because it embraces it, transforming collapse into beginning. Basalts formed at ridges do not rest forever, either. As they drift outward, away from the ridge line, they cool, age, and eventually vanish again, subducted back into the mantle at trenches across the globe. The ocean creates, but also reclaims. New crust is born, old crust consumed. The rhythm is patient, cycling not in centuries, but in millions of years. Entire seafloors are made and unmade, erased like chapters to be rewritten later. Could this too be memory? The memory not of details, but of cycle itself. The endless reassurance that even when erased, what is lost has already been prepared to return. Some vents leave chemical trails that persist long after their collapse. Isotopic markers within minerals tucked into chimneys reveal temperatures, compositions, even the microbial communities that once thrived there, silent testimony to vanished episodes of eruption. These stone signatures are memory in another form, geology pressed into mineral record. Scientists read them like whispers of vanished flames beneath the ocean, flames that lit no sky, but reshaped entire regions. And again, we cannot help but ask, what if such oceans of fire are not unique to Earth? Across distant moons, beneath the crusts of Europa, Enceladus, or faraway exoplanets, there may be oceans capped in ice and fed from below by volcanic heat. Could hydrothermal plumes there also feed unseen communities, chemical gardens unlit by stars? Is it possible that life's story is being told elsewhere, again and again, wherever water and fire collide? Here on Earth, the thought brings humility. For our continents may rise like permanents, but beneath them the planet is always remaking itself, always cycling its seafloors in hidden symmetry. If land is our illusion of stability, then the ocean's volcanism is truth, the reminder that even the ground beneath us is temporary, always shifting, always drawn back into molten depths. Beginnings bloom where we see endings. Order dissolves into heat, and yet from heat comes life again. The silence here is deceptive. We cannot hear the vents exhaling, cannot hear magma as it intrudes and hardens. But the ocean carries its presence everywhere. Minerals drift, ecosystems thrive, new basalt pushes outward. The seas are alive not only at the surface but far beneath, where fire writes across salt water. And so oceans of fire remind us of an arc too vast to hold in waking thought. What erodes on land feeds the sea, what dissolves in water fuels corals and plankton, and what is buried in the abyss is born anew at ridges lit by invisible flames. Life itself may be entangled in these rhythms. Fragile creatures above dependent upon nutrients stirred from below, abundance depending quietly on destruction. If the ocean is both cradle and pyre, both builder and eraser, then what else might remain hidden in its silent chemistry? Among the isotopes locked in shells and minerals, there may be another archive, one of even subtler whispers, the language of elements recounting forgotten climates. Perhaps the truest record of oceans is not cast in stone or fire, but in the faint isotopic trails that tell us where waters have been and what they once carried. If the truest records of oceans are not only in corals or in stones, not only in fire erupting from beneath, then perhaps they exist in something subtler, something so small it cannot be seen, yet so enduring it outlasts whole epochs. For hidden in shells, in sands, in sediments layered deep upon the seafloor, lie chemical signatures, ratios of elements, delicate variations from one isotope to another. They cannot speak aloud, but they whisper. They whisper of warmth and cold, of glaciers grown and glaciers vanished, of rains that fell endlessly, of droughts that burned. Oceans have always spoken, but in the quiet tongue of isotopes, they become storytellers most profound. Consider oxygen, the atom that built our breath. It comes in several forms, light and heavy, and each holds a subtle hint of climate's balance. In cold ages, heavy oxygen lingers in seas while lighter forms are trapped in ice. In warmer times, the ratios shift, carried into shells of tiny plankton, pressed into limestones, preserved across ages like invisible ink. To measure an isotope is to listen to an ocean's memory, to hear its faint accent as it recalls climates no living being witnessed. We cannot see the ice ages unfold, but in oxygen ratios we can hear their echoes still. Carbon too leaves its trace. Plants and plankton fix it during life, and in their remains the balance of carbon-13 and carbon-12 becomes a record of their abundance, their flourishing, their sudden collapse. A spike of carbon written in sediment may speak of volcanic fire releasing vast breath from Earth's mantle, or of forests burning in prehistoric droughts, or of oil-rich seas so alive with plankton they left behind towering layers of black shale. Carbon is both storyteller and reminder, whispering not only of abundance but of endings, when climate unbalanced and oceans smothered life in silence. Nitrogen, delicate and fleeting, also lingers long enough to tell its tales. Its isotopic ratios shift with nutrients, marking where waters circulated, where they stagnated, where oxygen slipped away. When scientists sample old layers of seabed, they find nitrogen signatures locked like faint heartbeats of ancient circulation. They tell us of times when the pulse slowed, when oceans forgot to breathe evenly, when species suffocated in darkness while the planet quietly turned. The whispers repeat the same truth in different voices. Life depends upon balances so fragile that the smallest shift can ripple through millennia. What is striking is not only the science, but the poetry hidden within it. These isotopes are not deliberate records. They were not carved intentionally, inscribed, or told as stories meant to last. They are accidents, byproducts of how molecules move, how water evaporates, how organisms weave elements into their skeletons. And yet, by accident, the ocean has written us a library beyond words. Every drop of rain, every breath of oxygen captured in coral, every plankton shell crushed into sediment, is a line in that library. To learn to read isotopes is to learn to hear what the ocean has always been saying in silence. And it asks us unsettling questions. If chemical signatures remain even when voices are gone, then what will our age whisper? Already isotopes of carbon carry our presence. A spike so sharp it will be noticed millions of years from now. The Seuss effect, scientists call it, the mark of fossil fuels altering the balance of carbon isotopes on a planetary scale. Whether anyone is here to read it or not, our breath has already become part of the record. Could it be that the ocean's future storytellers will remember us not through fossils, but through isotopic scars written into every shell, every grain of sand? Maybe, maybe not. But even imagining this humbles us. The ocean carries isotope trails like invisible fingerprints of time. They are not dramatic, not loud, not obvious, but they endure. They remind us that memory does not require intention. Even silence, even absence, is written chemically. Perhaps memory itself is less about what is kept alive deliberately and more about what is carried forward by inevitability, by repetition, by entropy. We lean closer to the isotopic trails and we listen. We listen not with ears but with patient instruments, with quiet curiosity. In ratios of light and heavy oxygen, we hear ice expanding. In shifts of carbon, we sense forests burning. In nitrogen, we hear waters gasp for breath. We lean close, and the ocean whispers back to us, not in sentences, not in human words, but in numbers that unfold as patterns, in traces that reveal forgotten climates. We do not understand all of it. Perhaps we never will, and perhaps that is the point. Some stories are not meant to be fully decoded, only listened to with humility. And yet, if isotopes can whisper past climates, if memory can be sealed invisibly within molecules, then what are these whispers saying about the direction of time itself? For all things drift, all things spread, all things dissolve eventually. Even oceans, vast as they are not immune. Their currents, their temperatures, their very chemistry are subject to the great principle that touches everything, the law of entropy. The world does not move toward order, but away from it. Heat balances, energy dissipates, records scatter. But perhaps entropy is not only loss. Perhaps in its deep unfolding, it is transformation, a slow weaving of patterns that emerge only as other structures dissolve. In the beginning, oceans were hotter, younger, restless. Heat erupted constantly from molten ridges. Currents boiled with instability. Over time, temperature gradients softened. Energy spread between hot vents and cold basins. The restless softened into steadiness. Tides learned rhythms under moonlight. Climates found balance enough to sustain life. Entropy does not steal without giving. It trades. Sharp difference for gentle equilibrium, chaos for continuity. What erodes in one sense creates stability in another. The seas teach us that balance is not the absence of decay but its quiet outcome. Currents, too, obey the slow unraveling. They surge now, carrying warmth from tropics to poles, nutrients from depths to surface, but even these circulations may one day slow. As ice melts and salinity shifts, the intricately balanced conveyor may falter. Entropy works not by destruction but by evening out differences. Waters mix, temperatures equalize, the great hidden pulse diminishes. What then? Is it possible that the Earth will lose its steady heartbeat? That circulation itself is temporary, destined to smooth into silence? Maybe, maybe not. For even if old rhythms end, new ones may arise. New flows shaped by different balances, still carrying the imprint of entropy's hand. We see it most clearly in energy. Every shaft of sunlight absorbed by waves, every volcanic plume that heats the depths, every molecule of air turned by wind, all eventually spreads. Heat radiates outward, seeking balance, never to return in the same form. No cycle is perfect. Nothing repeats unchanged. There is always loss, always dispersal. To some, this seems bleak, but perhaps entropy, gently, patiently, is how the universe ensures impermanence, the necessary condition for newness. Because without dispersal, without drift, there would be no circulation, no cloud, no tide, no growth, no collapse that allows rebirth. And the oceans remember this most of all. Sediments scatter records, sometimes lost forever. Tectonics sink entire archives into the mantle, their fossils erased. Yet from these losses, new basins form, new shorelines open, new ecosystems bloom. We mourn the loss, but the loss is the transformation. Oceans live in this dual truth. They are keepers of memory and agents of forgetting. Who else but entropy would allow them to be both? When we contemplate entropy, we imagine final endings. A quiet ocean, no longer moving, spread into lifeless calm, its warmth even, its depths indistinguishable from surface. But perhaps this vision is not a defeat, but simply another shaping, another balance. Does not every tide end by returning, every wave fade only to rise again? Entropy is not destruction, but leveling, an unseen patience reminding us that permanence was never real. And still, within entropy, beauty endures. In diffusion of salts, in slow equalizing of temperatures, in sediments crushed and shifted and returned, patterns emerge as if by accident. Cliffs of chalk, forged from countless shells dissolved. Quiet circulation of hydrogen and oxygen through molecules that once belonged to trilobites, now flowing in us. Energy leaks away, yes, but meaning appears in the transformation. We are part of that meaning. Our breath, our bodies are as temporary as the waves. Yet like the waves, we carry pattern for a moment, pushing it forward before dissolving again. Could it be that memory itself relies on entropy? That we remember not perfectly but imperfectly, because forgetting, dispersal, drift are required for meaning to survive? The ocean seems to tell us this truth. A fossil locked in stone is not the whole story, but a fragment. A coral skeleton holds not every season, but enough to suggest cycles. Whispers become meaningful only because silence surrounds them. Order becomes visible only against disorder. Perhaps entropy is not the thief of meaning, but the frame that gives it shape. So we lean into this slow unraveling, this leveling of differences, and see within it continuity. Energy moves through whales, through plankton, through fire, through stone, and always disperses. But in its dispersal, it feeds new life, new memory. Entropy is the soft hand guiding oceans through their transformations. And yet, if everything drifts toward loss, if entropy is the patient unraveling of oceans across deep time, then there are also moments when loss does not unfold slowly but rushes forward all at once. Sudden floods, great drownings, when the sea's edge leaps beyond its boundary and swallows the land, reshaping not only shorelines but also memory. For across the long span of human story, water has often been the agent of erasure, turning fields into bays, villages into reefs, and myths into warnings. The ocean's slow patience sometimes breaks, and in that breaking, new legends are born. Science tells us the record quietly. Each flood leaves its imprint in layers of sediment. Beneath coastal plains, archaeologists find beach sands sandwiched between soils, telling of ancient waves that swept suddenly across inland ground. In Black Sea basins and Mediterranean deltas, researchers uncover shells that reveal a sharp transition from fresh to salt water, marking floods that transformed lakes into seas, in years rather than ages. In ice cores and isotopes, we hear whispers of meltwater pulses, when glaciers, releasing their locked oceans, poured billions of tons into the seas, raising levels faster than coasts could retreat. Floods are both geological event and cultural scar, written first in stone and then in memory. And memory preserved them longer than sediment ever could. Stories echo across continents, curiously alike though separated by oceans. Tales of deluge, of entire peoples drowned, of worlds washed clean, and only a remnant saved. In Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh listens to flood myths told by Utnapishtim. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha watch a great flood reshape the earth. In cultures of the Americas, Asia, the Pacific, voices retell variations of the same story. The water rose without mercy. Is it possible that all of these myths stem from scattered recollections of real floods, real coastlines erased by sudden drowning? Maybe, maybe not. But the overlaps are uncanny. Science reads layers of sediment. Myth reads layers of fear and awe, bound together into stories of beginning again. There is a deeper layer still. We measure sea level over cycles of ice ages, knowing that as ice sheets retreat, waters climb. But to those who lived on coasts 10 or 15,000 years ago, change was not abstract. Entire landscapes were lost within a lifetime. The Doggerland Plains beneath today's North Sea once held forests and rivers, now drowned. Sundaland, south of Asia, stretched wide with fertile valleys, now hidden beneath currents. These vanished lands were homes, paths, memories, all undone by rising seas. What we call continental shelves today were once inhabited, walked, planted, remembered. Their erasure was total, and yet, beneath the waves, fragments remain. Stone tools, bones, villages sealed in silt. Entire human epochs are now ocean floor. This is entropy in another rhythm, not slow leveling but sudden collapse. Yet even collapse reshapes. Floods carve new bays, create estuaries rich with nutrients, stir currents differently, sharpen the coastlines we know today. What appears as devastation in one time becomes the groundwork for abundance in another. Could it be that catastrophe and renewal are simply two modes of the ocean's memory? That just as isotopes whisper the slow passage of ice ages, floods shout, imprinting their evidence in louder layers of stone? Still, it is the human memory of these drownings that haunts us most. Because where geology is neutral, myth is emotional. We inherited a fear of water too great, water out of place, water that takes identity as easily as it takes land. Yet we also inherited stories of rebirth, that floods cleanse, that they reset, that from loss comes renewal. Perhaps both are true. Memory is never a single voice. It is many voices layered, like sediments laid down by tides. In the present, we see echoes again. Rising seas now creep slowly against our coasts, but superstorms push them forward in sudden surges. Islands vanish, deltas sink, coasts fracture. To us, these are crises of now. To the ocean, they are simply another page, another repetition of a pattern older than any human map. The great drownings continue, not because the ocean seeks them, but because melt and rain and tide converge, inevitably, across time. And yet, what do these drownings mean for memory itself? Is it possible that more of our history lies beneath oceans than upon land? If coasts were always shifting, if villages and cities slid into silence with each age of melting ice, then how much of what once was is now unrecoverable? We tell ourselves that myth is imagination, yet geology insists it is also archive. Memory is not whole but fragments, part stone, part story, part silence where both are missing. Perhaps this is why floods unsettle us so deeply. They remind us that permanence is never real, that what feels solid underfoot may one day lie beneath miles of water. The drownings replay the larger truth entropy already shows. Nothing static lasts, nothing fixed is forever. But unlike patient entropy, floods collapse the illusion quickly, breaking time open, forcing new awareness. And still, beneath the waters, the drowned plains remain, untouched, layered, held in sediment. To study them is to remember again. To dive among them is to stand at a border between known and erased. They whisper back to us, through tools, shells, fragments, reminders of both how much has been lost and how much the ocean keeps safe for no one. And yet, if floods can conceal our stories in the seabed, if myths are the faint voices of lands drowned beneath water, then what of the stories we leave now? For already, the ocean is accepting our remnants, tucking them into sand and silt as it once received trilobites, ammonites, corals and shells, plastics and glass, steel wreckage and concrete fragments. These too drift downward, settling on the seabed. The ocean does not choose what it keeps. It simply buries. It folds all traces, living or artificial, into its quiet archive. And in that silence, we have become another entry, another layer. The ocean cradles our waste as memory. Straws, bottles, fractured remnants of nets. Their polymers too stubborn for quick decay, are spread across currents, ground into microplastics that sink like mineral dust. In trenches miles deep, explorers have found plastic bags and soda cans, resting as if forever. In Arctic ice, fibers of polyester wait, frozen with ancient air. Perhaps one day, far from any living witness, these fragments will harden into technofossils. Geological reminders that a species once learned to turn oil into permanence, briefly, and dispersed it everywhere. Steel and concrete undergo their own transformations. Sunken ships rust slowly, bones of iron dissolving into sediments, leaving mineral signatures that future geologists may trace like isotopic whispers. Submarines, pipelines, machines, our tools now litter the seafloor just as ancient shells once did. Even dust from our smokestacks, falling invisibly, rains into oceans, mixing with calcareous plankton, cementing future rock. Unlike myths of flood, which memory turned into story, these traces require no myth. They are already there, sinking quietly, without meaning yet, but perhaps not without significance. This is the paradox our presence brings. We are ephemeral creatures, fragile against time, yet the things we make endure beyond us. Not because they were designed to be immortal, but because they decay slowly enough to outlast our lifetimes. Layers of plastic, of ash, of metals altered by human chemistry, settle like pages in a book the ocean is already binding. Scientists call it the Anthropocene signal, the distinct horizon that will split layers of stone into before us and after us. Could it be that we are already fossils, alive now but recorded as if we have already vanished? The question lingers. Will anyone be there to read it? In epochs yet to come, could another intelligence, whether born here or elsewhere, encounter these traces and wonder at them as we wonder at trilobites and ammonites? Plastics shaped into bottles, glass smoothed by waves, alloys that do not belong to geology. Will these appear as mysteries, as objects of speculation, as whispers of a civilization forgotten? Maybe, maybe not. Yet whether or not there is a reader, the record remains. The ocean keeps as it always has, and there is another layer of wonder. Plastics, though artificial, have entered ecosystems in unexpected ways. Birds weave them into their nests. Deep-sea amphipods carry them within their tissues. Corals entangle them upon their skeletons. Already, the artificial is fusing with the natural so that the boundary blurs. Our traces are not simply resting. They are entangled with life, altering genetic lines, embedding themselves into new evolutionary stories. Could it be that our legacy will not be buildings or books, but molecules of polymers woven into the very biology of the seas? Perhaps memory is not separate from life after all. It is merged within it. Entropy touches these artifacts too. Steel will dissolve, plastics will fracture, concrete will crumble. But slow decay may be enough for them to harden into new stone. Plastiglomerates, scientists already call them. Rocks fused with plastic, sand, coral, and glass, appearing on coasts where human traces have joined sediments into hybrid geology. We are watching memory form in real time, watching our age pressed into permanence beneath waves. And so we are humbled. For when we study fossils, we marvel at lineages gone, never imagining that we, too, are already leaving our silhouettes in stone. We imagine ourselves as observers of extinction, guardians of memory. Yet, in the ocean's endless patience, we are also participants. Our plastic, our alloys, our isotopic scars of carbon, they are entries in the archive whether we wish it or not. Memory is not voluntary. It is inevitable, written in chemistry, weight, and decay. Perhaps this is what the ocean teaches us in this new epoch, that we cannot separate ourselves from the archive we inherit. We are not outside memory but within it. Every object we scatter, every plume we release, every structure we abandon is added to the silent story the sea is already telling. Even myths of flood are being joined now by sediments of plastic, by layers of technofossils, by a signature that declares, they were here. And yet, if our traces are already fusing with the seabed, if plastics and alloys are embedding themselves into tomorrow's stone, what of those who came before us? What of ages erased not by fire or decay alone, but by the slow and sudden rise of seas? Shorelines swallowed, valleys drowned, coasts rewritten by water that knows no boundary. For as much as geology keeps record, and as much as memory persists in fragments, there are lives, whole cultures perhaps, that slid beneath waves beyond recovery. The ocean has always been a witness, but it has also been a keeper of secrets. We know the drowned cities that stand as markers. Pavlopetri, off Greece, its streets now a grid below tides. Dvarka in India, with walls and temples whispered of in myth and matched by archaeology. Stone circles off Japan's Yonaguni, debated still, are they carved by hands or by nature's erosion? Even in these examples we hear only faint echoes. The lines are blurred, the ruins softened, the evidence ambiguous. Oceans do not maintain edges neatly for our inspection. They grind, they conceal, they silt over, until what remains is no longer structure, but shadow. And there are the greater plains, Doggerland beneath the North Sea, Sundaland across Southeast Asia, Beringia where rivers once coursed. These are not single cities but whole continents worth of habitat and story. Forests fell there, animals passed, and surely human lives stitched their patterns into the land. Yet when waters rose at the end of the last ice age, these shelves drowned. Now they lie beneath gray waves, their memory reduced to artifacts strewn in silt, tools or bones scattered like whispers across the seabed. Most remains are unreachable, carried into depths by tides, layered beneath centuries of sand. Entire histories rest there, not destroyed, but hidden in silence. Is it possible that there were civilizations we do not know, lives and wisdom erased beneath seas before we had the words to record them? Perhaps not empires in the sense we imagine, but cultures rich with story, ritual, invention, all gone. We will likely never know the extent of what was lost. But the ocean, burying their traces as it buries shells and ammonites, has written them into invisible strata. Archaeology can unearth fragments, but the whole story remains beyond disentangling. What we recover is never complete, only glimpses. A shard, a foundation stone, a tool corroded by time and tide. Enough to feed speculation but never certainty. Myth fills the gaps where archaeology cannot reach. Flood legends ring the edges of memory, Atlantis in Greek imagination, or lands submerged in Aboriginal songlines, Polynesian stories of coasts devoured, Norse sagas of seas reclaiming once fertile land. Perhaps these are not simply fiction, but memory transposed into tale. Stories stretched across millennia until history and imagination blend irretrievably. Could it be that myth is the lingering voice of lands lost too quickly, too utterly, for fossil or isotope to capture? Myth carries what science cannot always prove. Silence carried forward in symbol, and the silence can be unsettling. Just as fossils remind us how many lineages disappeared without record, drowned shorelines remind us how much of human history may be missing. We see ourselves as beings of story, of memory, yet how much have we already forgotten? How much was hidden before words, before archive, before technologies of record? Perhaps we are looking always at the tip of an iceberg of memory, while the greater bulk sleeps unseen, submerged in the ocean's keeping. The ocean does not choose what it keeps, but its forgetting is as thorough as its memory. Subduction buries coasts with seabeds into the mantle. Erosion reduces temples to sand. Saltwater corrodes inscriptions faster than desert winds ever could. Even what survives as stone may be lost to depth, unreachable in trenches or beneath shifting tides. We imagine memory as permanence, but permanence is another illusion. The seas remind us that forgetting is not always absence. It is a form of erasure that allows silence to endure instead of story. And yet these traces matter. A flint blade dredged from sediment tells us not only of toolmaking, but of the presence of lives along coasts now gone. A ceramic shard found beneath waves suggests that where water now laps, there was once fire, dwelling, culture. Each artifact carries weight beyond itself, becoming a bridge of possibility. What was the life that held this tool? What were the voices that told stories by that fire? What wisdom, what memory, what knowledge slipped into the sea with them? We will likely never answer, but the questions themselves remind us that existence is more fragile than history suggests. If one day another intelligence reads our technofossils, perhaps they will wonder at us as we now wonder at them. The faceless they we imagine lived on coasts that drowned. Not because of myth alone, nor because of science alone, but because both converge at the shoreline. The fragile boundary where civilizations flourished, and where oceans always arrive to erase. Perhaps in this there is a quiet lesson, that forgetting is as natural as remembering, that oceans act not as destroyers but as editors of time, deciding what survives and what dissolves. But even editors leave traces, faint threads that spark curiosity. And so we continue to listen, to search, to ask. And yet, if civilizations themselves can dissolve, if whole cultures and their wisdom can slip beneath the tides into silence, then what does that say about us, here and now? Perhaps the lesson is that identity, like the ocean, is not fixed but fluid, always in motion, always dissolving and gathering again. We find ourselves mirrored in the sea's endless turning, in its tides that rise and fall, in its currents that flow and return. To look into the ocean is to glimpse a larger version of ourselves, restless yet cyclical, eroding yet renewing, always in transformation. The tides tell us this gently. Twice each day they advance, twice they retreat, reshaping coastlines strand by strand. Each tide is temporary, yet the rhythm is eternal. Could it be that we too are like this, that the selves we feel so certain about, the versions of us engraved in memory, are no more fixed than a shoreline? We imagine stability, but in truth we are shifting patterns, always regathering around new moments, new thoughts, new stages of life. Not because we are inconsistent, but because we are living. Science reminds us that even our bodies are oceans at smaller scale. We are built of salt water and currents that flow through veins. Cells die and are replaced, atoms drift in and out, nutrients once belonging to other beings dissolve into us, then leave again. We think the body is a fixed identity, but most of it is temporary, recycled, replenished. Each few years, almost everything we are, physically, has been replaced. What we call continuity is really circulation. Could identity be the same? Not permanence, but process. Not selfhood as stone, but selfhood as tide? We sense this in memory as well. Our past selves feel like fossils, yet they are never fixed entirely. Recalling them reshapes them, introduces distortions, softens edges. A memory regathered is never the identical thing it once was. It is an echo reflected back like a wave, slightly altered each time. Maybe this is why the ocean feels like kinship. It shows us this rhythm openly, where waves never repeat exactly, yet the pattern feels eternal. Identity is not singular. It is recurrence through variation, permanence revealed only by change. Geology too whispers of identity cycles. Rocks at the seafloor are created, carried, buried, transformed into magma, then reformed again as rock. Erosion dissolves mountains into silt, which returns as stone. Nothing is truly lost, everything only becoming. How different are we? We dissolve daily in breath, in thought, in roles we shed, in parts of ourselves given away to time. And yet, from dissolution, new forms gather. Not because we resist change, but because change is all we are. In the ocean's deepest flows, thermohaline circulation loops water around the globe, taking centuries for one cycle to complete. A molecule of water that spends decades in the abyss will surface again to feel sunlight, only to sink once more. So too do our lives move between dark and light, times of depth and silence, followed by seasons of renewal. Perhaps this, too, is identity. Not a straight path, but a circulation of memory through light and shadow, growth and retreat, absence and return. Could it be that continuity is not in the self at all, but in the cycles that carry it? We are not the same child, the same adult, the same elder. We are not even the same mind with every passing season. Yet what binds us is the rhythm, the pattern of dissolving and regathering, of becoming and beginning again. Just as the sea is never the same water twice and yet is always the same ocean, we are never the same person twice, yet always the same being. Still, like the ocean, our identity keeps fragments. We carry fossils of ourselves. The way old memories remain, the way scars mark us, the way habits endure. They are our sediments layered within the present. And like sediments, they shift and press into each other, obscuring as much as they reveal. Who we were is not gone, but neither is it clear. It is layered, folded, rewritten, until what we call I is simply the newest formation, soft, temporary, endlessly contingent. The sea comforts us in this. To walk a shoreline is to step beside perpetual becoming. Sand is formed, carried, recarried, never still. Waves erase footsteps as quickly as they appear, yet the act of walking matters still. Perhaps this is how life itself should be read. Not as permanence, but as presence, vanishing even as it happens, yet meaningful in the moment of being. What remains is not who we once were, but the rhythm of having flowed. And yet, if we find ourselves mirrored in the sea's fluid identity, what happens when the tide recedes too far? When rivers slow and deserts feed dust into the waters, changing their fertility and shifting their balances. Perhaps the next memory we must follow is the story not of the tide itself, but of what drifts down into it, of dust falling into the sea, carrying echoes of distant places into its vast and waiting body. And yet, if identity is fluid, if the tides remind us that nothing fixed stays the same, then perhaps we must also look at what is carried into those tides, what drifts across continents before dissolving in the sea. For even the driest places, the vast deserts, seemingly barren and empty, are never separate from the ocean. Winds lift their silence as dust, scatter it across the skies, and deliver it to waters thousands of miles away. The Sahara speaks to the Atlantic. The Gobi whispers into the Pacific. Arid silence becomes nourishment for shifting waves. A grain of dust is small, yet together they form storms that are planetary in scale. Sand and soil, lifted by wind, sail through the thin medium of air before falling like whispers onto the ocean's surface. Each particle is a fragment of stone long eroded, a memory of mountains reduced to powder, of ancient seabeds lifted as desert by shifting climates. But within them are nutrients, trace elements like iron, phosphorus, silica, carried invisibly until water receives them. And once they touch the sea, the cycle shifts. Plankton bloom, life stirs. Dust is absorbed into the living fabric of oceans, transformed from silence into fertility. We rarely think of desert and sea as companions. One feels lifeless, the other overflowing. Yet they are completely entangled. Fertility of the Amazon rainforest, lush with sound and abundance, depends on dust from the Sahara, carried across the Atlantic to feed its soil. The same winds deposit iron into equatorial waters, sparking blooms of phytoplankton that exhale oxygen into the sky. Could it be that life's vitality is composed not only of what flourishes nearby, but also of what drifts from places we call desolate? Maybe not. But when dust falls, even emptiness nourishes abundance. For the ocean, nothing is wasted. Erosion of rock into sand, sand into dust, dust lifted into air, all eventually return. Grains sink, dissolve, feed plankton, which feed fish, which feed whales. Each step is transformation, each silence recast into song. What seems barren on land becomes memory rewritten in water. Entropy ensures that mountains fall, but oceans ensure that in falling, they feed. Perhaps this is the deeper lesson hidden in each storm of dust, that even the most arid spaces are not outside the cycles of life, but at their heart. The chemistry of it feels almost miraculous. Iron, rare in open waters, acts like a key in a hidden lock. Too little and plankton wither. Enough, and blooms rise like sudden fields across the surface, coloring the sea green with invisible abundance. Oxygen pours upward. Carbon sinks downward, drawn into marine snow and locked in sediments for centuries. From one dust storm, the planet's breath may shift. We cannot see it with our eyes, but instruments detect the bloom, satellites trace the color changes, and still the scale escapes our comprehension. Desert silence becomes ocean voice, carrying balance forward. What if memory works this way too? Perhaps what seems barren in us, the silent, the forgotten, the places in our minds where nothing grows, may still drift into other parts of being, feeding bloom we do not at first recognize. Could forgetting itself be a kind of fertilization, scattering fragments across the hidden waters of our lives? We do not always see the pattern in the moment, but later, something blooms from what seemed only emptiness. Maybe identity itself is seeded as much by absence as by presence. And still, not every storm is kind. Too much dust, too many nutrients, may spark blooms so vast they suffocate what lies beneath, depleting oxygen, turning fertile waters stagnant. The balance is delicate. Interdependence requires restraint as much as exchange. Not every gift is gentle, and not every silence nourishes. This is the fragility hidden within the cycle. Life depends not on endless abundance, but on precise balance, carried in dust, dissolved in water, whispered in chemistry. The planet survives in its measure, not its excess. We walk on coasts and see the horizon, thinking land stops here and water begins there. But dust teaches otherwise. Boundaries are illusions. Deserts and oceans converse daily, continually, folding their memories into one another. A single storm from the Sahara may feed fish in the Caribbean, forests in South America, and corals in the Atlantic. A grain lifted here may settle there centuries later, unchanged yet vital. The whole planet breathes in these exchanges, as if nothing, not even a desert, exists in solitude. And yet, if deserts can nourish oceans from afar, if even silence carried as dust can bloom into abundance, then what of true silence itself? Not silence filled with wind or particles, not silence transformed into growth, but silence that remains untouched, a deep, overwhelming quiet revealed only in the abyss. For in the ocean's deepest places, silence reigns deeper than any sound we know. To enter that world is to feel not emptiness, but presence, vast and immediate, pressing around us in ways words cannot contain. We often treat silence as the absence of something, an emptiness left behind when sound retreats. But in the abyss, silence feels different. It is thick, almost physical, a kind of fullness that does not erase but holds. Below the reach of sunlight, far beneath crashing waves and storms, there is no wind, no thunder, no voices, no noise from the land above. Only the slow pulse of currents moving in near stillness, the quiet settling of particles drifting down. This silence does not neglect, it invites, calls us to listen in another way, not with ears alone, but with presence. Scientists know the abyss is not silent in absolute terms. Hydrophones capture faint sounds, earthquakes rumbling along ridges, distant whale calls echoing across basins, bubbles rising from vents. But to us, carried into that depth, it is silence. Each sound is too far, too faint, too swallowed by immensity to truly register. In that vastness, each noise becomes fragile, dissolved almost instantly into the pressure of stillness. It is here, perhaps, that silence becomes its own kind of memory. Not a lack of record, but a record of absence itself. What if silence is not erasure, but archive? Could it be that what we feel in the abyss is the ocean reminding us of everything that has already passed, of how many voices time has covered? Silence preserves what sound cannot by holding space for it, by showing us its outline. Like fossils of vanished creatures, silence is the fossil of lost voices. Maybe memory is not only in isotopes, corals, or technofossils. Maybe memory is also in silence, waiting in the abyss where no one speaks. And silence, too, shifts perspective. We live most of our lives surrounded by noise, by movement, by interruptions. But when sound falls away, time feels different. Minutes dissolve into hours, hours stretch beyond counting. Perhaps this, too, is why the abyss feels eternal. Without sound, there is no rhythm to mark duration, and so silence aligns itself with deep time. Listening to it is like listening to time itself, unfolding slowly, patiently, without urgency. This abyssal silence also reminds us of identity. Just as our reflections in tides show us our shifting selves, silence shows us the outline of self-erasure. To enter silence is to lose the edges of individuality, to dissolve into scale larger than us. In stillness, we become less defined, more fluid, as though our own identity is sinking into the currents. Could it be that silence is not about absence at all, but about dissolving boundaries? A reminder that we belong fully to something wider, something vast and indifferent yet encompassing. Maybe not, but the feeling of it lingers even after we leave, like a trace that does not leave the lungs. This is why deep silence unsettles as much as it comforts. It humbles in the same way dark space humbles us. To listen to silence in the abyss is to face the enormity of existence, an immensity that continues regardless of whether we have words for it. Silence does not depend on us, yet we depend on it to remember where the limits lie. And still, the ocean's silence is not static. Even in its quietest depths, entropy is at work, sediments falling like whispers, molecules drifting, faint shocks of tectonic shifts rewriting the seabed. Silence is alive, not barren, filled with processes too soft for us to hear. In its fullness, silence presses upon us the reminder that the absence of sound is not the absence of life, but life in rhythms too slow for our perception. And yet, if silence speaks through stillness, if absence itself can carry memory, then what happens when silence spreads through something much larger, when oceans themselves begin to forget their rhythm? For currents, vast and hidden, are the breath and pulse of the planet. They hold the memory of warmth, of salt, of movement carried faithfully across centuries. But sometimes those currents collapse. The ocean forgets to move as it did, and when that forgetting comes, the world above trembles. The thermohaline circulation, driven by differences of temperature and salinity, is one of Earth's most enduring patterns, pulling warm water northward, sinking cold water downward, moving slow and steady like a heartbeat in deep time. Yet the record tells us it has faltered before. Around 12,000 years ago, as glaciers retreated, sudden floods of fresh water spilled into the Atlantic. The balance tipped, density shifted, and the conveyor slowed. Almost overnight, in geological terms, the world cooled. Europe froze again, harvests fell silent, and the younger Dryas, a 1,000-year pause in warming, began. Not because the land forgot, but because the sea forgot how to circulate as it had. A single interruption in rhythm rewrote history. We see signs of forgetting in the sediment cores. Layers of isotopes mark interruptions where oxygen in deep waters vanished, where circulation failed and left seas stagnant. Black shales press into stone as warnings of times when oceans stopped supplying nutrients, when life collapsed into silence for centuries. Each layer is a memory of forgetting, paradoxical but true. A geological page inscribed with the absence of current, the absence of breath. Forgetting, too, becomes part of the archive. It is difficult for us to imagine such scale. We see a current as steady, eternal, unchanging against the span of our short lives. But nothing in the ocean is immune to entropy. Even circulation is conditional, dependent on balances so delicate that a shift in ice melt, or in salt, or in temperature can quiet an entire ocean basin. What if identity itself works like this? What if we are less permanent melodies, and more fragile currents, bound together only as long as balance allows? Sometimes we too forget patterns we once carried, the rhythm of a culture, the memory of a language, the story of a people erased not by force alone but by neglect, by silence, by a current of time that ceases to flow. And yet this too has its place. For in forgetting, new balances arise. The ocean's loss of rhythm is often temporary, a pause before new motions are born. When currents return, they stir fresh layers, awaken new systems, redistribute nutrients across seafloors. Could forgetting be necessary, a kind of reset within the larger memory? Perhaps no rhythm lasts forever, but perhaps no rhythm needs to. The forgetting itself becomes transformation, carrying the imprint of the past into new forms. We feel its echo in the present. Scientists now warn that the great Atlantic circulation may slow again as ice sheets melt, as fresh water dilutes the saltiness that drives sinking currents. Models imagine Europe cooling, monsoons shifting, food chains trembling in response. But the ocean does not announce catastrophe with thunder. It changes in stillness, quietly, until consequences unfold. The forgetting spreads not as disaster, but as imbalance, thinly stretched across decades, centuries. And we, living in such brief moments, sense its edges in subtle ways. A drought that lasts longer than memory, a migration of fish into new territories, a season heavier with storm than before. Forgetfulness unsettles us because it reminds us how fragile memory truly is. A current does not grasp its rhythm. It simply moves until something changes. Likewise, perhaps we imagine we control our memory, personal or collective, yet so much can slip away quietly. Languages go extinct. Names fade from stones. Futures are born without knowing the past buried beneath them. We fear this erasure, yet the ocean reminds us that forgetting is never pure loss. It is clearing, rebalancing, transformation into a new page, a new flow. It is curious to think of water as both remembrance and forgetting. It preserves isotopes of climate in shells that endure for millions of years, yet it also wipes clean coastlines and clandestine civilizations in a moment's rise. The current that carries abundance today may vanish tomorrow, leaving absence as its only trace. Both are memory, both are truth. The sea does not choose. It only flows, and sometimes it forgets to flow. And maybe that is enough. To know that forgetting is also part of the story, part of the slow continuity of Earth. If the seas never forgot, then nothing would change. Stasis is not life. Change requires loss, even when that loss carries famine, disruption, silence. Memory and forgetting are not opposing forces, but two halves of the same tide. So we listen not only for what the ocean remembers, but for how it forgets. We hear it faintly, in layers of sediment, in models of lost currents, in warnings of collapses ahead. And as we listen, we understand, forgetting too is a form of endurance, another way the ocean shapes becoming. And yet, if currents can collapse into forgetting, if motion itself can dissolve into absence, then what remains are the fragments, the small reminders carried back to us by tides, scattered along the sand. Beaches are filled with these countless pieces, broken shells left behind by beings long vanished. We stoop to gather them not because they are whole, but because even in their brokenness they carry the shape of what once was. Each fragment holds an echo, the soft residue of a life now scattered into grains and shards. The shells whisper of deep time. Once they were homes for mollusks, chambers that held soft creatures moving through their simple tides of eating, growing, dissolving. When the animal was gone, the shell endured. Washed ashore or buried in sediments, it is always more durable than the life it once sheltered. In this way, shells are like fossils in miniature, tiny architectures of calcium carbonate that resist for a time before waves grind them further into sand. What we hold between our fingers is a midway stage, not permanence but pause, a brief moment before memory dissolves completely. Science shows us how shells preserve subtle stories beyond their beauty. Their layered bands reveal the pace of growth, recording seasons of abundance and scarcity like rings in a tree. Their isotopes mirror temperatures of the waters they grew in, critical for reconstructing climates of forgotten years. Even a fragment of shell, shattered by waves, still contains the chemistry of its time, the invisible code of oceans past. To pick up a broken shell is to hold a quiet data point in the planet's vast archive, unknowingly, as though listening to a scientific whisper through touch. Yet when we collect shells, most of us do not think of isotopes. We think of memory in another way. We place them in pockets, in jars as souvenirs, not of the life that formed them, but of our own moment beside the sea. Each fragment becomes layered with personal meaning, blending the shell's long history with the fragile span of our remembering. Could it be that shells are mirrors of memory itself? Fragments always incomplete, enough to remind, but never enough to show the whole. Maybe not. But they remind us that memory, like waves, is rarely intact. It arrives broken, scattered, yet still luminous. Over time, shells erode into sand, becoming countless grains indistinguishable beneath our feet. The beach itself is a mass grave of shells too fragmented to recognize. And yet, from this dissolution comes the familiar softness of coasts, the landforms we walk upon. Fragility becomes foundation. Erosion is not only loss, it is contribution. What vanishes as individual beauty persists as collective form. Is an identity like this too? Each of us a fragile shell, one day broken, scattered, yet joining into a larger continuity that outlasts us. Perhaps this is why we stare at shells with such quiet attention. Their fragility feels close to ours. Their incompleteness reminds us of our own. We too live briefly within structures of skin and bone, and once gone, only fragments may survive. A tooth, a trace, a name engraved on a stone. Our memory, like theirs, is partial, fragile, scattered. Yet even fragments are enough to echo. Maybe wholeness is not required for meaning. Maybe fragments are all there ever is. And still, the ocean does not keep fragments forever. Tides reclaim them grain by grain, and what is left is folded back into the larger cycle. Sand compacted into stone, stone uplifted again into cliffs, cliffs eroded back into grains. Fragments feed the planet's endless loop of loss and renewal. Even broken, shells continue shaping coastlines, continuing the story. Nothing is truly gone. Only changed, only scattered, only softened for another beginning. And yet, if even shells dissolve into fragments, if memory survives in pieces more often than in wholes, then what does that tell us of time itself? Perhaps time, too, is not linear and unbroken. Perhaps it is more like the ocean, gathering and scattering, dissolving and renewing, endlessly patient. In its vastness, the ocean remakes time, not with hours or calendars, but with cycles so slow and expansive that our own measures falter. Beneath its surface, minutes blur into centuries, centuries dissolve into eons. The sea teaches us, quietly, that time is not a straight line but a tide. We measure time by clocks, by the steady tick of seconds, by the rhythm of days and nights. But the ocean is slower and more deliberate. Its rhythms are counted not in hours but in turning currents, in the drift of sediments, in the rise and fall of coastlines across ages. A current that now circles the globe takes centuries to complete its loop. A layer of sediment on the deep seafloor, scarcely as thin as a sheet of paper, may represent thousands of years. To lean into the ocean's perspective is to feel the inadequacy of our own. We speak of lifetimes, it speaks of epochs. We count years, it remembers climates that shifted long before us, and will shift long after. Geology records this strange remaking of time. Within corals, isotopic bands mark seasons like ghosts of tides long past. Within shells buried deep, oxygen ratios speak across millennia of warm seas replaced by ice. In abyssal plains, layers of chalk formed from endless plankton blooms hold spans so wide that we cannot imagine them directly. To us, these are archives. To the ocean, they are only breathing slow, calm, unhurried. Could it be that the ocean is not bending to time, but bending time to itself? Maybe not. But when we listen, its rhythms overwhelm our own. Time feels different beside waves. Watching water fold in and out across the shore, we sense a rhythm older than language. It is hypnotic, not in its change but in its repetition. Each wave is both the same and not the same, each arrival familiar, each retreat erasing what came before. We lose minutes here, watching, listening. We are absorbed not into the measurement of time, but into its dissolution. The sea softens time's edges until its flow obscures entirely, and what remains is only presence. Perhaps this is the truest lesson of its rhythm, that time is not about holding, but about flowing, letting go, beginning again. And yet the ocean's slowness is not stillness. It is patience. Subduction pulls entire slabs of seafloor downward, recycling crust into Earth's interior. The process takes tens of millions of years, yet in its cycle continents form, collide, fracture, disperse. Entire civilizations of stone and coral may be uplifted into mountains, then ground to dust, then returned once more into sea. Each step is measured not in seconds, but in geological time, the slow clock that refuses to be hurried. The ocean writes this clock through inevitability, showing us that no matter how much we hold onto our moments, they are only sparks against its long horizons. Philosophy often asks what time is, yet perhaps the ocean answers in its own way. Time is not a line, nor even a circle, but a vast unfolding, an unhurried expansion where every motion is carried forward into the next. The laws of physics tell us entropy disperses, structures dissolve. But seen from the ocean's perspective, this dispersal is not loss. It is elongation, stretching time into balance, weaving meanings too subtle for us to perceive in our brief spans. Could it be that what we call loss is only the slow motion of memory into patience, our brief moments folded into waves that will outlast us? And in this patience, the ocean humbles us. We live with urgency, with lists and hours and deadlines. But to the sea, a century is a pulse, 1,000 years a sigh. Our own rise and fall may one day appear as no more than a ripple in its archive, a thin layer of technofossils and carbon isotopes pressed into sediment, indistinguishable from other layers of change. And still, even then, the ocean will not hurry. It will keep writing, keep stretching moments into cycles. Not because it ignores us, but because time flows differently through its body. When we lean into this awareness, perhaps we find comfort. Our anxieties dissolve against such scale. If the ocean remakes time, then nothing is final and nothing is wasted. Every fragment of shell becomes sand. Every grain of sand becomes stone. Every stone becomes dust to fall again into the sea. Memory itself may not hold forever, but its patterns survive in repetition. Life cycles, climates shift, currents slow and return. The ocean is patient because it knows that all things come back in form, if not in self. And yet, if the ocean remakes time with such patience, if it stretches hours into eons without distraction, then could it be that within those tides lies something more than motion? What if memory and motion could entwine so deeply that the ocean itself might dream? For in tides that rise and fall, in currents that sweep nutrients and whispers across centuries, we may be glimpsing not only cycles of water and chemistry, but the subconscious of the earth itself, dreaming, remembering, repeating. Dreams are not built of facts, but fragments, woven together into stories we cannot always explain. The ocean, too, keeps fragments. Sediments eroded from mountains, shells shattered on beaches, isotopes marked quietly in corals. Alone, these are pieces, faint impressions. Together, laid across time, they become patterns. Ice advancing, then retreating. Species rising, then falling. Entire cycles repeating with strange familiarity. To us, this looks like geology, like climatology. But could it be, in another reading, the way the planet dreams of itself? Could the ocean's repetition be the subconscious of Earth looping old stories into new forms? Science gives us the language of cycles. We speak of Milankovitch rhythms, of orbital tilts that summon ice ages, of El Niño and La Niña oscillating heat through Pacific winds, of whole oceans swinging warm and cool across centuries. Yet when spoken aloud, these cycles echo like dream refrains, recurring, weighted with familiarity, yet never quite the same. Dreams revisit themes, but with altered details. So too does the ocean. Each extinction recalls a former silence. Each recovery echoes resilience. Perhaps this is dreaming not in sleep, but in motion, an archive reinterpreted endlessly, memory that forgets and remembers all at once. If the ocean dreams, then its consciousness is unlike ours. It does not dream in hours of night, but in millions of years. Its subconscious moves with glaciers, with volcanic chains that rise and dissolve, with circulations that require centuries to complete. It dreams so slowly that we, bound by short lives, can glimpse only the faint outlines of its stories. Like standing beside a sleeper and watching their breath, we catch only the rhythm of inhaling and exhaling, without ever entering the dream itself. Perhaps our myths of floods, sea monsters, lost lands are not only our imagination, but ways of brushing against those hidden planetary dreams, interpreting them in human time. Consider extinction. 5 times at least, life has nearly collapsed, washed away in oceanic silence. Each was an ending, yet each gave rise to new beginnings. Mammals replacing reptiles, corals rebuilding after collapse, plankton reshaping waters after ancient blooms. In our measure of time, these are catastrophes. But in the ocean's dreaming, they may simply be recurring motifs, necessary passages, moments where memory folds back, erases, and opens again. Just as dreams dissolve boundaries between end and renewal, perhaps the ocean's extinctions and survivals are intertwined threads of narrative, repeating to itself. Everything ends, but everything begins. We can imagine the ocean's dream as layered. The surface, stirred by wind and sun, holds fleeting ripples, the quick thoughts of a sleeper, restless and shallow. Deeper down, circulation loops patiently, carrying warmth and salt around the globe. The heavier rhythms, like the slow roll of enduring memory. And in the abyss, where silence reigns, the dream deepens into something beyond story or thought. Only immersion, only presence, fragments dissolving until time no longer distinguishes past from future. Perhaps all of Earth's experiences compile here, in darkness, endlessly recombined, endlessly retold. Could it be that our own dreams mirror this? That when we sleep and images fragment, dissolve, and repeat in scattered symbols, we are only imitating what the planet has always done. Our brains recycle, rewrite, let go, remember. The ocean too recycles, rewrites, lets go, remembers. Its plumes are images. Its isotopes are symbols. Its currents are half-forgotten phrases. Maybe in dreaming, we are simply borrowing the ocean's older patterns, looping them within the electricity of our smaller minds. But there is another possibility. Dreams are more than memory. They are imagination, the mind rehearsing what could exist, not only what did. If the ocean dreams, then perhaps it does the same. Its cycles of abundance and collapse might not only replay what has come before, but prepare what has yet to arrive. Dreams project potential futures. The Earth itself, in its liquid subconscious, may be shaping futures not yet born. Climates, creatures, entire lineages still forming in fertile silence. A dream not for us to witness, but one we are contained within, unknowingly carried on its currents. Dreams, however, are impermanent. They fade even as we recall them. Perhaps so too with oceans. A current collapses, a circulation weakens, a reef dissolves, and for a span the planet forgets. To us, forgetting appears perilous. But to the ocean, it may be nothing more than turning over in sleep, slipping from one fragment of story to another. Wholeness was never the point. The dream itself is enough, even broken, even dissolving. Continuity is achieved not by holding, but by flowing into the next image, the next rhythm. Could it be that all life we know is only one passing dream of the ocean, bound to fade, bound to dissolve into the next? Maybe, maybe not, but the thought carries a soft humility. And so we listen for what the ocean dreams. In repeating currents, in isotopes whispering climates, in myths of flood that echo deeper cycles unknowingly. We may never know the dream entire, but perhaps we are not meant to know. Perhaps it is enough to have been part of it, to feel for a moment that the sea remembers us, not as individuals, but as one thread in its endless weaving. And yet, if the ocean can dream, if its memory can fold possibility into story, then what of the creatures that sink back into it when their time is done? Whales, vast and sentient, falling gently into the abyss, their bodies becoming sustenance for generations unseen. Are they part of the dream too? Perhaps in their long descent, the ocean shows us how even endings carry within them entire beginnings. And yet, if the ocean can dream, if its tides and currents weave memory into cycles of story, then perhaps its deepest dreams are written not in currents alone, but in the sinking bodies of those it has nurtured in life, the whales. Their lives, long and immense, already seem timeless, as if each breath they take is measured against epochs and not hours. And when at last their vast hearts still, they sink. They fall slowly into silence, carried downward into twilight, then into the black depths of the abyss. Their bodies begin the long sleep, a descent that becomes not an ending, but a monument, a gift, an echo stretched into centuries. When a whale falls, the ocean does not consume it at once. Instead, the body becomes an ecosystem. First, the sharks and fish arrive, circling, carving flesh into ribbons. Their feast is swift, a visible undoing of muscle and skin that once carried power across thousands of miles of open sea. But when they leave, the body does not dissolve, transforms. As bones settle, microbes colonize, pressing into marrow. Strange worms anchor themselves to vertebrae, clams cluster against ribs, bacteria bloom in oils and lipids. Slowly, steadily, an entire city emerges from what appears at first to be only decay. For decades, even centuries, these whale falls feed life. Tiny scavengers follow the bacteria. Crabs feed on worms, starfish drift nearby. In this darkness, where nutrients are scarce, the whale's body becomes a forest of plenty. Entire food webs build upon this one structure, as though the whale has become a coastline at the seafloor, a reef without coral, a sanctuary in a realm of silence. Its memory is alive, sustained in the lives that gather around it. Even in death, the whale carries continuity, not because it resists decay, but because decay itself is nourishment. Science tells us that some bones remain for 100 years, leaching energy into sediments. Oil from the skull and vertebrae fuels microbial blooms for generations of creatures never seen by the surface. The whale's fall is not a brief event but a slow unfolding, a written testament in living form. This body held within it enough power, enough substance, to last beyond the span of its own being. Not a fossil frozen into stillness, but a shifting archive, shaped by each new inhabitant that finds shelter there. In this, perhaps, is another form of memory. Not memory as words or isotopes, not memory as shells or corals, but memory as presence distributed across countless others. The whale's life extends not in its bones alone, nor in the record we might one day unearth, but in the continuity of the creatures that grow from its undoing. Could it be that all identity follows this path? That when we dissolve, when we are scattered into dust or silence, we too are remembered not as individuals, but in what we feed, in what we leave behind, in the patterns that ripple forward through others. To imagine the whale's sleep is to imagine deep time in miniature. A body that once swam across hemispheres now lies still upon the seabed, and yet, in that stillness, time expands. Its collapse is not an end but a cycle. To us, bones seem like remnants. To the ocean, they are beginnings. Perhaps memory always rests in this paradox. To decay is not to disappear, but to be carried forward in forms foreign and new. Maybe memory lives best not in preservation, but in transformation. And so the whale, even in silence, remains a teacher. Its descent reminds us that death is not absence but continuum. That return to the ocean is also return to story, to cycle, to nourishment. It becomes the ocean's dream given form, the reminder that end and beginning are not separate, but entwined. And yet, if whales in their long sleep write memory into decay, carried for centuries in silence, what of tides themselves? What of the daily rise and fall that marks the pull between earth and moon? A cycle not of bodies falling but of water endlessly returning. Perhaps the next story is written not in silence or in fossils, but in rhythm, the soft philosophy of tides teaching us the patience of return. And yet, if whales in their long sleep remind us that endings dissolve into beginnings, what of the waters themselves that never rest, never sink, but rise and fall with endless patience? For each day, across every shoreline, tides move, a rhythm older than memory, drawn not by the will of the ocean alone, but by the distant pull of the moon. Between earth and moon stretches a thread invisible, yet it tugs entire seas, lifting and lowering their surfaces as if with a breath. Tides are the body's inhale and exhale made planetary, a quiet pulse that is at once universal and personal. They measure gravity in motion. Twice each day the ocean reaches inland, twice it falls back, sculpting coasts grain by grain, weaving estuaries and deltas, carrying sediment and memory. What begins as mathematics, the moon's pull balanced by Earth's spin, arrives as poetry upon the shore. Each rise is surrender, each retreat a reminder of return. To sit before them is to feel time stretched not by seconds but by cycles, giving us a rhythm we do not control, but one we can lean into like breathing. For early life, these tides may have been the teacher of rhythm itself. In tidal pools, water retreated and returned, leaving behind worlds of turbulence, survival, adaptation. Organisms learned to endure the absence of water, then its presence again, evolving with patience into forms capable of both. Could it be that tides seeded the first metaphors for time, not seconds or calendars, but the lesson of return, of presence that is always partial, always renewed? Maybe, maybe not, but their movements shaped not only land but the very possibility of stepping onto it. We stand upon shores and feel their gentleness, yet tides are sculptors of continents. Over ages, their advances grind cliffs into beaches, their retreats scatter beaches into bars and shoals. Fossils reveal entire coastlines shifted through tidal persistence. Slow enough our eyes miss it, patient enough the archives cannot. Currents stirred by tides redistribute nutrients, carry plankton, feed corals, shape estuaries where civilizations first thrived. Entire cities rose on tidal flats, fields nourished by the silt left as waters fell. We are shaped by them even now, though we rarely pause to notice. And tides are mirrors of our own inner cycles. We too know rise and fall, fullness and absence. Our emotions are energy. Our thoughts move like tides, advancing, receding, never still. Perhaps this is why watching tides soothes us. Their patience teaches us that retreat is not disappearance and rise is not permanence. Loss is only the tide carried backward. already moving toward return. The ocean does not cling to either state. The tide is always on its way somewhere else. Identity, as tides remind, is fluid not because it is weak, but because it belongs to motion. Science measures their precision. Tables can predict them for centuries ahead, mapping their heights, their intervals, their phases with the moon's orbit. And yet, their presence feels more mystical than mechanical. To watch the tide cover a footprint is to watch impermanence written plainly before us, a reminder that what we mark will not remain. To see it retreat is to know absence, yet also to know it will return. Entropy seems softened here, not as loss, but as cycle, woven into daily reassurance. Could it be that tides are the Earth's philosophy, written in liquid? They do not argue or command. They demonstrate. They whisper the deepest lesson. Surrender. To rise is not triumph, to fall is not failure. Both are inevitable, both necessary, both transient. And in their patient oscillation, they teach us harmony with forces greater than ourselves. The moon does not need our consent. The earth does not ask for our belief. The tides move regardless. All the ocean asks of us is that we listen. When we lean into that listening, we find their rhythm carried inward. The lungs swell, the heart's pulse, the pauses between thoughts, all mimic tidal motion. Life itself seems to echo the pull between moon and sea. Perhaps this is not coincidence, but kinship. We are water nearly as much as we are anything. Could it be that living beings carry tidal memory within our very bodies, a cellular inheritance of that ancient rhythm written into the ocean long before land was conceived? Maybe, maybe not. Yet when we breathe beside the coast, exhaling as waves exhale, it feels less like metaphor and more like recognition. There is comfort in their predictability, but also mystery in their persistence. Long after we are gone, long after our artifacts break into dust and even our technofossils dissolve into sediment, tides will continue. They will wear away the remnants of our coasts, carry our fragments out to sea, fold us into their cycles until we are indistinguishable from all that came before. In that dissolution lies not erasure, but continuation. The tide does not keep what it carries, nor does it lose it entirely. It transforms each thing into part of its turning. And yet, if the philosophy of tides speaks through patience and surrender, written in advance and retreat, then what of the seafloor itself, holding every wave and layer, pressed with records of what once was? Perhaps the next story is not only about what moves, but what settles. The ocean is archive, a vast library buried not in stone above, but in sediments below. And yet, if the tides remind us of rhythm, of patience repeated with the pull of the moon, then what of what settles beneath them? For as waves rise and retreat, as currents stir and resettle, silence collects on the seafloor. Layer by layer, grain by grain, the ocean builds its archive. Beneath the restless surface lies something still. A vast hall of records, pages not written in ink but in silt, dust, shells, and decay. The seafloor stretches across the planet as the quietest of libraries, one where each layer is a page of history, laid down patiently, waiting. It is easy to think of the deep ocean as an emptiness, a place where little happens. But below the abyssal dark, sediments fall in continuous procession. Wind-borne dust carried from deserts, volcanic ash from distant eruptions, shells of plankton blooming and dying on the surface. All drift downward through the quiet, falling for weeks, months, before reaching the bottom. When they settle, they do not vanish. They form sheets of time. A single centimeter of mud may represent hundreds of years, pressed into stillness. A single core, lifted from the seafloor, might hold millions of years in its slender cylinder. Climates shifting, extinctions whispered, waters warming and cooling, all kept as faint traces that never intended to be kept. Scientists approach the archive with patience, drilling into silence as readers open pages. They examine isotope ratios, uncovering when ice expanded, when sea levels fell, when oxygen in currents slipped away. They trace the slow collapse of ecosystems, the return of abundance, the faint signals of volcanoes that darken skies for years. In the tiny shells of foraminifera, they read oceans like a diary, The creatures too small to see with the eye carry chemistry etched by their time, their waters, their air above. From dust, they reconstruct rainfall. From carbon, they hear the echo of forests. The seafloor is not mute but filled with account after account, written across epochs in minerals and fossils no thicker than a hair. But it is not only science that makes the archive profound. There is something dreamlike in knowing that Earth keeps so much without intent. Entropy scatters, and yet here the scatter itself becomes memory. The seafloor does not curate, it simply accepts. It lets everything fall and through falling preserves. Could it be that memory does not require will, only accumulation? Maybe not. But when we touch a core of ancient sediments, pulled cold from the dark, it feels like touching the outline of time itself, pressed into patient layers. This vast archive reminds us of impermanence and continuity at once. Nothing on the surface lasts, mountains erode, cities collapse, species vanish. And yet, in the quiet of the seafloor, traces endure. We may no longer see the forests of the Carboniferous or the ammonites that crowded Mesozoic seas, but their presence lingers in compressed remains, in chalk cliffs that began as algae, in limestones that began as coral. Even human beings are already writing themselves into this archive. Technofossils of plastic, metals, radiocarbon signals from nuclear fire, all falling in silence into sediments, waiting their turn to harden into the library of stone. Yet the ocean's archive is fragile. The same forces that preserve it also erase. Tectonics will swallow whole shelves of memory, dragging sediments downward into mantle heat to be remade. Currents churn and disturb layers, rewriting pages before they can settle. Much of history is lost long before it can fossilize. Perhaps this too is part of the design. That not everything can be remembered, that forgetting is woven into memory as its twin. The ocean's archive is vast, but it is never complete. Philosophically, it humbles us. We see ourselves as record keepers, as preservers of history. But the ocean has been keeping records since long before we arrived. Patient, impartial, unselfconscious. It remembers through grains of dust ground from vanished mountains, through isotopes shifting silently in tiny shells. Its library holds more than we could ever read, written not in our language but in the language of chemistry and erosion. Could it be that the truest history is not the one we tell, but the one the planet writes of us? Maybe, and maybe not. To listen to the ocean's archive requires silence, slowness, humility. Each layer studied is not only data but echo, faint presence from an epoch that knew nothing of us. The quietness of it feels almost sacred, not because it speaks of grandeur, but because it speaks at all through stillness. Perhaps this is what makes it so dreamlike, that memory is not only held in loud events, but in the soft fall of particles so small they seem invisible. Yet together they write chronicles longer than any book. And yet, if the ocean's archive records all that falls into silence, then what of the future? The library is not closed. The next layers are written even now, through storms, deserts, coral fragments, dust, and our own fragments as well. If the past is buried there, so too is the present, already pressing itself into future stone. What will it say of us? What stories will be deciphered from our layer? Perhaps the next chapter the ocean writes is not of what has passed, but of what is still to come. An ocean shifting toward a last future it will one day remember and then let go. And yet, if the ocean archives everything that falls into its silence, then there must come a time when even that archive closes. For nothing endures untouched, not stone, not memory, not water. One day, perhaps, Earth's oceans themselves will reach their quiet conclusion. They have outlived continents rising and shattering, outlasted species too numerous to name. They have folded floods, extinctions, and civilizations alike into their pages. But even the sea must one day yield. Its end is not imminent, not measured in years or centuries, but when we lean into deep time, into horizons far beyond the scale of our lives, we glimpse possibilities of oceans transformed so completely they are no longer oceans at all. Science stretches our imagination here. Astronomers speak of the sun's long future. Billions of years from now, its heat will intensify until Earth grows too warm for stable oceans. Waters will expand, then vaporize, boiling into sky, a runaway greenhouse that leaves only a dried crust where once there was sea. Or perhaps, further still, if Earth continues to circle a fading star, oceans will freeze into sheets of ice, sealed beneath shadows of red twilight. In either ending, the seas we know will be gone, their tides erased, their memories locked away, whispered only in fossilized stone. And yet, endings create their own reflections. If the ocean ever vanishes, what will echo in its absence? What shadows of life will persist when water itself is gone? Could memories remain in salt flats, in mineral strata, in isotopic trails etched into rocks so ancient they resist even melting? Perhaps the last future ocean is not liquid, but archive, its memory pressed permanently into crust and core. What was once flowing becomes still. What was once time stretched into patience becomes time held in silence. It is haunting to imagine seas boiling into vapor, a future Earth wrapped in clouds of steam, its surface barren and cracked, a world carrying the memory of oceans without their presence. To beings elsewhere in the universe, Earth might look like any arid planet, indistinguishable from Mars or Venus. Would they ever know oceans once filled its valleys, once shaped its memory? Or would the record be erased, indistinct, silent? The thought humbles us. We swim in oceans now, but their duration will one day belong to the past. And could we accept that? Could we accept that even oceans are temporary, that water, the cradle of life, the writer of memory, the endless mirror of sky, is itself impermanent? Maybe, maybe not. But perhaps acceptance is unnecessary. Perhaps the lesson is not that oceans end, but that even endings carry continuation. As water turns to vapor, it might linger in clouds beyond Earth, drifting into space, scattering molecules outward. Hydrogen breaking free, joining interstellar dust. Oxygen bonding elsewhere, perhaps forming oceans on another world, another time. If so, Earth's oceans would not end so much as disperse, continuing their whisper in forms unknown. Entropy assures this dispersal. All systems move toward balance, toward stillness. Yet, in this leveling, patterns persist. Memory survives not as permanence, but as transformation. If the last future ocean is sky, or is ice, or is simply mineral written into crust, it is still memory, the last diary of liquid Earth shifted into another medium. Just as a wave breaks but continues as foam, just as a shell dissolves into sand that endures as stone, so too the ocean's final transformation will continue as something else. Perhaps memory itself relies on such dispersals. Without them, nothing new could arise. It is tempting to imagine life in that distant horizon. Could any beings endure Earth once its seas are gone? Perhaps microbes beneath the crust, feeding on deep heat, long after surface life is erased. Perhaps nothing at all, only the faint isotopic scars of what once thrived in swell and tide. Or perhaps water disperses outward only to carry life beyond us, as comets and asteroids seeded Earth with oceans long ago. Could Earth one day return this gift, scattering remnants of its seas across distant worlds? The ocean would become not merely local, but cosmic, its memory dispersed like starlight across space. Philosophical wonder lingers here. If the ocean ends, were we simply a dream within its longer dreaming? Did we always belong not to permanence, but to a story that had to fade? We live as though oceans are eternal, yet their own history says otherwise. They have risen, fallen, shifted, vanished from basins only to reappear anew. Maybe the last future ocean is only another chapter, another version of remembering and forgetting folded into planetary time. Maybe eternity is not unbroken continuity, but unending reinvention. And still, beneath speculation, there is tenderness. For when we stand today at a shoreline, watching waves climb and withdraw, it is impossible not to feel eternity stirring within them. Even knowing they are temporary, they hold us with a sense of forever. Their rhythm is both fragile and vast, carrying us beyond history and toward horizons we will never see. We do not need to witness the last ocean to know it exists. Its echo is already here in each tide. So we listen. We imagine seas that will vanish into sky, that will freeze beneath faded suns, that will dissolve into crust. We imagine that their memory will persist anyway, in crystals, in stones, in dispersed vapors across space. We imagine that our lives, so brief, so fragile, are nonetheless written into their flow, a chapter in their dreaming. And yet, if even oceans one day pass away, if water itself dissolves into silence, then who or what will remain to remember them? Perhaps memory will outlast not in liquid, not in stone, but in something older still, an echo carried beyond Earth into the cosmos itself, waiting to be heard by whoever or whatever comes after. And yet, if even oceans one day dissolve into silence, if water itself passes into vapor or ice, then the question rises, who will remember? When all is done, when humans and our stories are erased, when whales no longer turn within the dark, when corals crumble into dust, when tides no longer breathe against shorelines, who will remain as keeper of these waters? For memory requires no witness to exist, but without someone to recall, memory feels like silence unacknowledged. Perhaps the memory itself will echo through dust and starlight, not in language, not in script, but in the endless matter of the universe. The ocean is both cradle and elegy, holding within it the beauty of what begins, and the hush of what must inevitably end. We know the seas as alive places, tides, waves, storms, currents. But one day they too will fall beneath entropy. Entropy, patient and impartial, waits for oceans as it waits for mountains, as it waits for stars. Energy disperses evenly, circulations flatten, temperature reaches balance. Seas will settle in their exhaustion and vanish, not in sudden drama but in the inevitability of dispersal. Yet even then, traces of the ocean will linger, salt carved into stone, isotopes locked into crystals, dried basins etched into continents. These remnants, faint but enduring, will themselves carry the whisper, water was here. But who will hear them? Who will read what remains? Perhaps by then, there will be no ears to listen, no hands to touch the memory pressed in rock. Perhaps there will only be a planet silent, stripped of oceans, drifting under faded starlight. Perhaps Earth itself will remember, not as mind, but as presence, carrying in its very crust an unconscious ache of oceans long gone. Could it be that memory itself outlasts consciousness, persisting not in recall but in trace? Maybe, maybe not. But to imagine it is to sense humbleness beyond words, that the ocean does not need us to remember. It will have written its memory into stone long before we were here. Still we ask, what if memory must travel further? Already hydrogen escapes upward, drifting through atmosphere into space. Perhaps fragments of ocean float outward even now, atoms leaving Earth forever. Dust of seas contributing to interstellar clouds, mixing with the primordial gas that may one day birth new stars and new worlds. If so, the ocean is not lost. It is scattered, written into galaxies, folded into other planets' possible waters. Perhaps on some remote shore, countless light years away, molecules once belonging to Earth's ocean will rise again against sand under another sun. Could it be that Earth's water will live elsewhere, repeating its cradle, birthing voices never meant for us? Maybe, maybe not. And yet this vision comforts, that the ocean's memory is not bound to Earth alone. Life itself may carry memory far beyond us. Comet ice, planetary fragments, drifting matter, all may one day hold the story of oceans that once were. Even if Earth loses all water, the chemistry seated here is already immortal in its dispersal. Perhaps in cosmological silence, oceans endure not as seas but as echoes within the universe's wider bloodstream. And perhaps this is enough. To be both cradle and elegy, beginning and end, means the ocean has already fulfilled its story. It birthed life, nurtured it, carried it, and in the end returned it to silence. It preserved epochs in its sediments, transformed mountains to silt, dissolved shells to sand. It gathered fragments of everything from everywhere. It spoke in isotopes, in tides, in fossils, and in floods. And when it ends, its story will still be folded into other stories. No memory is pure loss, no ending complete. Humans, brief in our witness, have tried to listen. We record, we measure, we tell stories of currents, extinctions, floods, dreams. We imagine, project, mythologize. Perhaps remembering the sea is not about carrying it unchanged into eternity, but about knowing it now, about pressing our ears to its breath, placing our feet at its edge, letting our small span of life fold into its older rhythm. Even if we one day vanish, we lived here during oceans. We belonged, briefly, to their memory, in knowing that we remember not only seas, but ourselves. And still the question lingers, who will remember the sea? If not us, then perhaps the sea itself. Oceans have always been both witness and archive, collecting memories no one asked them to. They preserve far more than we can read. They hold within their chemistry everything that has touched them. They do not forget in the same way we do. They hold as silence holds. Indiscriminate, vast, without judgment. Could it be that to ask who is the wrong question? Perhaps it is not about someone remembering, but about memory simply existing, whether witnessed or not. Memory is as real as matter, it does not require us. This thought brings a strange peace. Yes, one day the ocean will vanish, but memory does not end with absence. Memory continues in traces, in echoes, in dispersals. The ocean is both cradle and elegy, its essence to give and to take away, to begin and to dissolve, to preserve and to erase. To listen to the ocean is to hear eternity in miniature. It has always remembered more than we ever could. And yet, if this much can dissolve into silence, if even oceans, the largest memory we know, can pass, then what of us? What of our own stories, our own lives, fragile against epochs? Perhaps the truest answer is that we too are fragments, destined to be carried forward, not in secrecy but in scattering. The sea reminds us that finality does not exist, only transformation. Maybe our memory, like its tides, will belong not to permanence but to motion, rippling outward until it finds its stillness. So who will remember the sea? Whoever listens, whichever atom carries forward, whichever silence still holds the trace. Whether sky, stone, or starlight, the ocean has already become the memory of the earth itself, both cradle and elegy, unfinished in its ending, continuing far beyond us.